Good evening. Welcome to the Warrant Committee. It's March 26, 2025. Karen, could you call the roll, please?
Yes, we have Tom Caldwell, Steve Rhines, Lori Connolly, Liz Dillon, Jay Fernley, Julie Joyce is on Zoom, Macy Lee and Peter Mon are here, Julian Maxwell is on Zoom, we have Brian McGuire here, and on Zoom we have Ron Sia and Judy Steele. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks, everybody, for being here. As you saw and as we spoke about, the school committee will be coming in momentarily. They're doing a public information session, and we'll be coming over here very shortly. So we can take the opportunity to maybe just speak about, I sent an email along this afternoon if no one has seen it as of yet. But I kind of, after I spoke to the town administrator today, the select board meeting was last night, and I prepared an email for everybody to take a look at, and I included 3 articles that we're going to be considering for town meeting. And Karen, could you put the articles up? I think it's the creation of the Special Education Stabilization Fund. So basically, there's just a synopsis I give concerning the override scenario. And last night, the select board voted to add an article to the warrant committee to increase the appropriation to the fiscal 25 budget's reserve fund by $700,000, and that appropriation would come from free cash. Now, as a result of that request, the select board will not be recommending that the town appropriate any funding to the creation to a special education reserve fund. I think the initial intention was there'd be a $1 million appropriation to that fund upon creation. Instead, the select board, and we will discuss, but we will all recommend establishing it and perhaps appropriating $0 to it. So the override scenario hasn't changed. I know there was some discussion last night about a possible number change that did not happen. So the override amount is still 9.95, and that's 8.8 to town and school operating budgets. That hasn't changed since our last conversation, and that's $700,000 to the operating budget stabilization fund. That's no change. So that's the 9.5 figure. Now, this is the article to create a special education reserve fund pursuant to, let me see here. It's pursuant to the Mass General Laws. Sorry. Can you make it a little bit bigger? Okay, thank you. Laws established by Chapter 40, Section 13E. It's a reserve fund to pay for unanticipated or unbudgeted costs of special education, out-of-district tuition. We've discussed at length in transportation. So this is what we're looking to do at town meeting, is establish this fund. I think it was discussed. I'm sure our subcommittee would have can add to this discussion. But so we'd be looking to do this, and as I had indicated in the email, would just be the select board is looking to create this fund, recommend it to town meeting. Recommend it to town meeting, but have 0 funding in it. So, Karen, could we go to the next article?
Is that reserve or operating budget?
Reserve, please. Okay, so Special Education Reserve Fund, the article would indicate it would be funded. Oh, can you go to the other one? Not 2, but I think it's.
Sorry, hang on.
Beautiful. Okay, so this is the next article. This is to establish a special purpose stabilization, known as the Operating Budget Stabilization Fund. That's for the purposes of funding the operating budgets of the town and the public schools, and to see what sum of money the town will vote to appropriate said reserve fund, and how said appropriation will be raised. So this is the amount. Sorry, I just need to. So we're going to appropriate this is the 2.7, and this is where the money is going to be coming from free cash. So we're going to be moving $2 million in free cash over. 2.7 to the Operating Budget Stabilization Fund, that the sum of $2 million be appropriated from funds certified by the Department of Revenue, and the $700,000 be raised from the tax levy pursuant to the override request that the town will be voting on. So those are the three articles. So it's the establishing, the funding, and then the movement of the money for the Operating Budget Stabilization Fund. So those are the three articles that are going to be in play. Does anybody have any questions about it? We just got these this afternoon, so that's why I sent the email out to try to break them down. Jay?
Yeah, so the previous plan was to put $1 million in the Special Education Reserve Fund, and now it's to put $700,000 in the reserve fund, which leaves $300,000. Do we know where that's going? I think maybe last night Nick might have said, "Oh, free cash" or something.
Free cash, I believe.
But then, yeah, that might be something to be hammered out in the next couple of days.
That will be, Jay.
It could go to this. It could go to the Budget Stabilization Fund, if nothing else.
So I believe this is going to be going to the reserve fund.
Yes.
Yes,
The
okay.
700 is going to the reserve fund. And it's going to the FY25 reserve fund.
Yep.
Okay.
That's FY '25. Okay.
Okay, so that's what's going to be in play. Sorry, Jay, just took a second.
Okay,
for me
but
to-
still, and I guess this conversation is assuming the override passes. There's still an extra $300,000 that was in free cash this year that we can use for next year's budget.
And it'll be appropriated in FY26, so it'll be like set to go into FY26, but it'll be available because it's still kind of in free cash. And then, should there be an issue and we need more money,
So it'll just be extra free cash to start the year with.
well, that was part of the, I think, the million, right? So we had $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
We were gonna fund, now we're funding it at 0.
Mm-hmm.
700 is going into the reserve fund
Mm-hmm.
to help with the 25 problem.
Mm-hmm.
And the 300 is, if we put it, if we don't want to tie it up, so we're trying to keep it so it's available to be able to,
Oh,
if we need it. So it's
Okay.
staying basically where it
which isn't how,
is in free cash.
I know other towns roll over their free cash. Milton hasn't in the past.
Well, and it would have to be certified, right?
Oh, because it's last year's free
And
cash.
that's why it's not being, that's why
Yeah.
it's not being appropriated in the 700 that they're putting in.
Yeah,
the
so,
reserve. They don't want it to be tied up, so it would, go back into a free cash calculation,
Okay.
which we wouldn't be able to have access to until October, November.
But I guess if they say right now, oh, we're going to put it to,
The intent is to put it towards the FY26 appropriation
of what?
of, we'll see what we need, if we can put it in a fund, or if we
Okay.
might need it, if something goes sideways between now and when we know what the year's
Okay.
gonna close out at.
And I guess since we're having a town meeting in mid-June,
Right,
worst comes to worst is we'll figure it out before
that's
then.
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
and that's what
Sorry,
we'll do.
Lori, it's a little hard to hear you on Zoom. Lori, can you just maybe adjust your mic?
read my email.
Sorry.
Okay,
Thank you.
Is that better? Do you want me to repeat what I said?
No, we could mostly hear it, but it'll be good moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks for telling me.
Sure.
Okay, so, I believe we'll be seeing potentially something concerning that free cash, the appropriation to the reserve fund prior to us breaking for the fiscal year in June and prior to the meeting. So I assume that there'll be a further discussion about that, but we can have a greater discussion. I know the town administrator will come in. We also have the schools here this evening. We can discuss it with them further if members want to inquire of these three articles, but I think we kind of laid them out pretty clearly in the email, and in addition to that, we'll have the opportunity to ask Mr. Milano some questions just about it. So that being said, we have school committee is here and some other special guests. So I think I'd like to take the opportunity to say hello, school committee, superintendent, Ms. Blake. It's great to see you all here. Thank you. And I'd ask you if you'd like to come up to the table. Good to see you all again.
Thank you for having us. Sorry we're a little late. We just finished the information session at Pierce, which was great. And made our way over here. So thanks for your patience.
No, thank you very much, Chair Carroll, again, for accommodating our schedule, especially as we're all busy here at the end of the year. So thanks for coming over and meeting with us today, everybody. So I think, this is just typical, I think, of obviously a unique situation here, given the override and other things, but this is really just our typical meeting that we have with the schools, traditionally Warrant Committee, where we discuss, obviously, the upcoming budget, concerns, things that you've been working on. I think we all know as a town and groups, individual citizens, that there's been a lot going into the schools and the budget this year. So just obviously describe the process, things that you want to highlight for us, potential moves, and obviously at the very end, like we have with other departments, if there's no override, how does that look for the school department as a whole? So. Just asking, the floor is yours. I'd like you to if you'd like to present as much as you'd like, and maybe we could have a question and discussion session. Maybe at some point we kind of get into this kind of the back and forth, but I give you as much time as you need to get forward out there as much information as possible. And that's it. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. Thank you all for your engagement up until this point in this process, especially Lori, Steve started their day with us this morning at the Finance Subcommittee meeting. Lori has attended many meetings. Thank you very much for that. And yes, we have a presentation. Mark, okay, thank you for running the slides. We are going to try to be as sort of concise as possible, but also thorough, and we're trying to sort of anticipate some of the questions that we expect you might be wanting to ask. And of course, you can feel free to interrupt us if you need clarification on something as we're explaining it. But we definitely do expect that following the presentation, we'll be able to kind of have some discussion, and we can always refer back to particular things we may have touched upon. We also have an appendix of additional slides that we can refer to if you want to go into more detail on things that we don't actually touch upon in the presentation. And so really, we're just beginning with this overview of our agenda, so you can kind of see what we're planning to cover in this presentation, and we'll be sharing the presentation amongst several of us, and then thanks to all of our members who are also here as well when we're doing the kind of back and forth. We'll all chime in and answer questions as that seems to make the most sense. So this is where we're going, and I'm going to hand it over to Mark to get us started with some of our framing.
Great. Again, thank you so much for being here. Watched many of your Warrant Committee meetings. Y'all spend lots and lots and lots of time on topics around the town. Really appreciate it. There were a couple things that I was hearing, especially in your last time you kind of talked about the schools, that I think are questions y'all are raising. I think are questions we've heard elsewhere too, across the town and folks. And so I wanted to start with a place of just framing before we get into the details on this budget. Just some general questions on what's going on with the school budget, right? Why is it increasing? Is there waste, right? Are we actually thinking critically about how efficient we're being as a town and as a school department with our budget? What is the trade-off we're getting for the money we're investing in the schools versus, what we're getting out? And so, I think some of these things can be subjective and, kind of a personal opinion, but I'm a numbers person. I really like numbers, and so I do try and define, right? I think efficiency is one thing. If we define it, the way I would define kind of how is a school department being efficient would be what are the returns we're getting in terms of academic achievement of our kids? How high are they performing? That is obviously the most important thing as it relates to our schools. Are we actually helping our kids excel and achieve really exemplary standards? And then, on the other side, from an efficiency perspective, is how much are we spending to get those outcomes? And so let's evaluate our school kind of based on those criteria and see how we're doing. And again, numbers person, love a good scatter plot. Scatter plots are amazing. So you see the y-axis is your per pupil spending. This is all 2023 data because that's the last year that per pupil spending is available. It's a lagging indicator, so there's nothing for 2024, so we use 2023. So y-axis is your per pupil spending. X-axis is your percentile rank for student achievement in grade, kind of the combined grade 3 through 8 MCAS score across the 3 subjects, tested subjects. So that's every city, every district in the state. Should say this does not include charter schools, took them out. Their funding process is obviously a little bit different than towns. So the red dot, as you can imagine, is Milton. So the yellow is all the towns that spend less than us per pupil, right? So we are in the 30th, just above the 30th percentile. It's 30.65 or 64 percentile. So those are all the towns across the state of Massachusetts that spend less than us. You can see vast majority of towns spend more than us, but those are all the ones that do spend less. The blue is all the towns that perform better than us on the MCAS, right? So again, the two kind of ways in which we evaluate efficiency, student outcomes and our spending. And so that green box in the bottom right-hand corner would be the most efficient school districts in the state, right? The ones that are actually spending less than us and outperforming us academically. And so if you zoom into that, right, which is very hard, there's essentially kind of 7 within this cluster. And some kind of fall outside the green, right? They have a little bit lower academic achievement or spend a little bit more than us. But again, maybe some people would argue that that's still more efficient. So I kind of tried to incorporate the full cluster. And those are the 7 schools: Winchester, Berlin-Boylston, Brimfield, Longmeadow, Holliston, Westford, Hopkinton. I had to look up several of these because I had never heard of them before and had not seen them, but they're doing tremendous. Especially, Hopkinton is doing really well. That student performance is exemplary. So really, really impressive school district. But these are the top 7. Milton being kind of within that top 8. So there are, by this metric, I'd say Milton is in the top, not 10th percentile, top 10 of most efficient school districts in the state. The outcomes we are getting for our students are incredible compared to the spending we are doing. And so I think that is just a really important framing as we think. I think we always want to be better. When I see this red dot, first thing I think of is how do we get that all the way to the right? That is not good enough. We need to be number 1 for our kids. We need to have the highest student outcomes. We need to be past Hopkinton. So I don't want to lose that. This is not meant to say that we are absolutely where we need to be. We should be always looking for ways to push student outcomes. However, I do think we should shout out and be very proud of the district that we have built within this town, that a lot of people have built, our teachers have built, The staff who have devoted careers here have built to say it's a phenomenally performing school district. We map this. I actually we need to shout out Jay here because I don't know how to map these things, but he had asked a question and then I told him I was working on this and was able to map this. So this is the spending. All the red ones are the towns that spend less than us. You can see most of those are not kind of right in our geographic area. These are all the towns that perform higher than us in that MCAS kind of consolidated score. And those are the 3 towns that spend less and perform better. So that doesn't include the couple that kind of are a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but that's it. Those were the 3 and where they are. I think the other thing to talk about is like, again, what does this mean historically? What have we been doing as it relates to our investment in our kids and how that compares across the state? And so this is, all this information is on the state website, publicly available data, right? Going back to 2008, that's the first year that they had per pupil data. So that's why it starts there. And this is our percentile rank of where Milton has been. So historically, we've been around the 40th percentile. You can see back in about 2018, it starts to dip. And we bottomed out in 2020. We have gone up a little bit in the last couple years. Still, the last 4 years represent the lowest per pupil spending compared to other districts across the state. Our percentile rank in per pupil spending, the last 4 years are the lowest 4 years in Milton's history, at least since 2008, right, since we have data. So we have decreased our level of investment, or our level of investment has at least lagged increased investment across the state. So again, just to kind of recap that, like when we talk about efficiency, I think we have an incredibly efficient system. We 100% need to always be looking for ways to do better, ways to improve student outcomes, improve student experience, ways to maximize efficiencies. That is absolutely the job of the school district, but I do think we need to shout out kind of the work that has been done of the many great educators within the district over many years. I think the other one that's been discussed is like, how does it values? And so as somebody who moved to Milton for the proximity to Boston and schools, and someone who's has kids in sports all across this town, who's have similar families. Most of the families have a similar experience to mine. Again, came here, they wanted good schools for their kids, wanted to be close to Boston. Think about kind of, the school's impact on Milton as a whole as it relates to property values. This clearly is not just a school-specific stat, right? It's our parks, it's how safe we are with our police and our fire and all the other wonderful town services we have. But we know property values in Milton have been skyrocketing. So since the last override, right, they've been up 53% from, this is based upon Zillow. Other metrics are pretty similar here, 655 to $1 million. For the property tax rates has decreased during that time by 20%. So we are, obviously, the raw numbers are going up, but that's because the value is going up. So the amount of you are spending on the value of your home since the last override has, drastically kind of increased. We also know inflation has gone up as well. That's gone up 28%. That's still well below kind of what the property values have gone up. And so, I think property values are increasing while property tax rates are decreasing. I think our schools have a lot to do with the property values within the town and how much those are going up because people they cherish the experience they have within living in Milton, which again is a lot of things, but the schools are a central part of that. So that's just like framing that I wanted to use to take the opportunity to shout out our schools because I don't feel like we've been able to do that as much lately as we've been kind of slogging through a lot of challenges, a lot of real challenges that we need to address. But now we're going to kind of pivot from that framing to talking about the current year financial deficit within FY25, and for that I'll pass it over to Katie.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I am going to do a brief overview. Sorry. So I am just going to be running through a brief overview of the fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25 budget history. So you can see, I know the font is somewhat small on this, but so just as a reminder, May of 2024, which was almost a year ago, the fiscal year 25 budget was approved, and the school department budget that was appropriated at town meeting was $67,225,233. So that was, again, May of &24. If we move forward to July 1st of 2024, that is when our fiscal year began. And so our budget lines were appropriated in accordance with the budget proposal that was approved during town meeting in May. If we move forward a few weeks during the month of July, again in 2024, that's when the fiscal year 24 deficit was identified and also addressed. So the school department prior year operating budget deficit was identified during that time, and the deficit was addressed using one-time funds. So when we say one-time funds, we're making reference to circuit breaker funding, which is the special education reimbursement funding that we receive from the state. So we used a portion of our circuit breaker funding. We also used some of the Medicaid reserve funding that we receive. Again, that's a reimbursement program. And then there were a number of, we reference them as chargebacks, but we utilize revolving funds from some of the school department funds, so the school lunch program as well as the community schools program. All of those one-time funds were used to address the fiscal year 24 deficit. So if we fast forward a little bit from July 2024, but looking back to January of this year, that is when the fiscal year 25, which is the fiscal year that we're currently operating in, that is when the projected deficit was identified. And again, just as a reminder, we are projecting, so it was not the deficit when it was identified. It was identified as what we were projecting the balance to be at the end of the fiscal year in June. It was not identified as the current balance, so that is just a projected deficit. And that was done as a part of the second quarter report that was presented to the school committee. Sorry, I'm trying to follow along and look at the screen. So a portion of the deficit that we saw in fiscal year 24, but that we're also experiencing in fiscal year 25 is due to a structural deficit within our operating budget. And so just to give more context around when we reference a structural deficit, just providing more information on what that actually means. So a structural deficit means that the recurring expenses are consistently exceeding the recurring revenues or the budget appropriation. And so some of the examples that we are seeing within the school department budget of deficit areas include the cost of substitute coverage. So when our teaching staff is utilizing some of their paid time off benefits, we are bringing in either outside staff through substitutes, or we may potentially have some of our own staff that has some time that they're able to cover a class. And so those expenses historically, we have run in a deficit position, which has resulted in a recurring structural deficit. And you can see some of those numbers here. And then we're also experiencing that in our utility budget. So you can see we've provided 2 years of historical data, the current year data, and then you can also see here in the grids the proposed budget for fiscal year 26. And so in looking at having a structural deficit, and in order to address a structural deficit, we really need to identify how it happens. And so structural deficits can occur for a number of reasons, and two of those reasons being that the budget is based on past budget numbers, and it's reflective of the past budget and not the past expenses. And so that was an important part of the process in looking at how much funding or what was the overall cost that we previously incurred, instead of just looking primarily at what was the budget that we had carried over from year to year. And structural deficits can also occur because of the rising cost of goods and services, and also due to demographic changes. So this is, in talking about structural deficit, we've also seen some deficit budget lines in special education. And so we've provided in this exhibit some historical information on 3 of the major budget categories for special education. Special education is a considerable part of the school's operating budget. And so this is just a snapshot of the expenses, but it does not encompass all of our special education expenses within the budget. So I just wanted to name that. But you can see here the budget numbers that were appropriated in the budget, the overall expense for these major categories over the course of several years. And then when we reference circuit breaker funding, again, that is the special education reimbursement program that we received through the state. You can see the amount of circuit breaker funding that we've utilized to offset that total expense for some of our special education costs. And so as a part of our recap, we were originally projecting an almost $2.3 million deficit for the end of the school year, and that was the original projection that was captured in the second quarter report. That number is based on a number of different things, one being known costs of both salaries and expenses. It's also based on projected expenses. So that was us taking a look back in January saying, we know that we still have several months of school left, and so we know that we will still have salary expenses to pay, we will still have substitutes that we need to pay, we will still have the lights on, we will still be utilizing water, we still have athletics teams, and so we truly need to be able to project out what those expenses are going to be, so we know that we can cover those expenses. Some of the known encumbrances, so that is if we've already captured that information in our accounting system, and then also some known costs that aren't necessarily encumbered or memorialized in the accounting system. We have to take into account those expenses, because even if they're not memorialized, we know that we typically will incur them. And so we have to take that into account when we think about our revenue versus our expense. Some of the areas of concerns that were identified were special education transportation, utilities, and the substitute teacher budget, which you just saw on the previous slide. And then we've, due to the deficit, we identified a number of different action steps starting early in February in order to address the deficit, which was a combination of a purchase order freeze, so saying to everyone, we truly have to limit what we're spending our money on, so we can't, if it is not necessary mandated per a student's education plan, then we need to put a freeze on all spending, a hiring freeze, so we have a number of positions that are currently open that we're either filling with substitutes or we're just not filling them at all. Allocating a portion of our existing custodial salaries to food service accounts, so our food service account is a separate self-sustaining fund. And so we did check to make sure that that was an allowable cost, so we were able to reallocate those. Reducing some of our purchase orders for consolidated facilities, so saying if it's something that we don't absolutely need right now, we can close out those purchase orders and potentially have to defer some of that maintenance to future years. looking at potentially some circuit breaker supplemental funding that is at the state level, utilizing a number of outside revenue sources for our school revolving funds, which includes community schools, Medicare, and building use, some of which we had utilized in order to close the gap for year 24. And also just looking at kind of our day-to-day operations and seeing of the operations that are outside, potentially outside of the contract, or something that we could potentially work with the union to say, can we do this in a different manner just for the remainder of the school year? And we were able to identify with our substitute coverage, utilizing our current staff in a different way, and then just trying to be more efficient about the way that we are covering classes going forward in an effort just to minimize the amount of money that we were spending because of the deficit. There was a number of different action items that we also discussed throughout the course of several finance subcommittee meetings, school committee meetings that were considered, but through the course of those conversations, they haven't been enacted, and you can see those on this list here. And then we're also, because we do still have a projected deficit, we are still actively working to address that deficit. And so some of the items that we're still considering, researching, and just checking to make sure that it's something that we could possibly do, are the items that are listed there at the bottom. But all of those, the net result of all of those action items still leaves us with a projected deficit of $683,000 for this fiscal year.
So obviously, having a deficit within the current fiscal year is not good. That's not what the town entrusts us with. And so one of the things that we have been talking about within Finance Committee and School Committee as a whole is, again, obviously what led us here, or that history as we've kind of laid it out, and how do we move forward and how do we strengthen, improve kind of the best practices from a finance side, from an oversight side, from a transparency side, on the school, within the school. And so the biggest one we want to highlight is what kind of Katie talked about a little bit before, but we think is really important, which is the development of the FY26 budget being done in a way that addresses the structural deficit as we have found it to exist within the current year budget. So adjusting those line items that have historically been underfunded, that have not been funded to reflect known expenses and historical expenses, fixing that. That is obviously the enormous reason why the school percentage increase for level service was as high as it was, right? It is now 8.4%. Large portion of that is this, right? Even just correcting for utilities and substitute line, that alone is $1 million. It's about $500,000 between the two of them. So out of the $5.7 million kind of school addition. So that is a huge one as it relates to the question that we get on, like, how can we be sure you're not going to be in this situation next year? It's those adjustments, those line-by-line adjustments that, again, all of you have the ability to look through within the budget documents in terms of the historical expenditures and budget and what the school committee is proposing for next year. So that's a big one we just want to reemphasize. The other process we are looking to implement within the year is this budget recasting. So essentially, January was too late to learn about the deficit, especially one of this size. And so how are we able to ensure the school committee and the town has transparency earlier as to potential concerns about line items being out of balance, right? Because those can happen. So what a recasting does is that after a fiscal year closes, sometime in early July, taking that final end-of-year expenditures, comparing that line by line with the next year's budget, the approved budget, and identifying if there are places within our, what at that point will be our current operating budget for next year, let's say FY26, where our FY26 budget actually is less than our FY25 expenditures, end-of-year expenditures. Because at that point, then, we can assess those places where there is a discrepancy, say, is there a reason why we would expect those costs to go down within this year? Maybe it just spiked for some known reason in the prior year. And if not, how are we adjusting that budget line to go up to accommodate for known expenses? And where are we taking that from elsewhere? Where are we reducing elsewhere to create what's called a recasted budget for FY26 to adjust for those actual expenses that we incurred and can assume we will incur in the following fiscal year. So that's another one. The other is this addition of curriculum funding within the FY26 budget. This is a concern that has been brought up within the community for a number of years, that the financial situation of the school district has been challenging to fund, and that there has not been a line item for curriculum in order to fund kind of what we're currently identifying as the most needed thing, which is the ELA curriculum. By putting that within the budget, not only are we able to fund the ELA curriculum, but a curriculum rollout is a multi-year process. It's not write the check, you get the curriculum, you're done. There's lots of professional development associated with it. Sometimes it's a rollout over, different grades, over different years. You're, again, training up people to make sure they're really supportive. Sometimes you have kind of initial professional development provided by the outside organization at the start. All these kinds of costs to kind of really build up and create robust understanding and implementation of a new curriculum. And then from there, that we have lots of curriculums beyond just the K-5 ELA curriculum, right? There's math, there's science, there's social studies, there's middle school, there's high schools, there's foreign language. There's constantly the need for the school department and the school district to be looking at our curriculum and identify ways in which ways in which we can improve it to improve the student experience, improve our student outcomes. Curriculum is a really key part of that. And so having that within the budget creates that sustainability over time. It ensures that we won't have, given that the future fiscal year projections are looking to be small in terms of increases, that won't be an issue where next year we need to come back for a spike of ongoing kind of curriculum funding and expenses. Another thing we've implemented fairly recently, but we're excited about, is the posting of all recording of our finance subcommittees. So I know that's something that this group talked about last year, even within the kind of warrant articles. Those are all on Milton Access, and we appreciate and shout out our Milton Access staff for posting those. Those will be posted moving forward, and it's the only subcommittee that I'm aware of in the town that does that, but we think that level of insight and visibility is really important given the size and impact of the school budget and the number of people interested in it.
Shout out Julia.
Yes, yeah, Julie as well.
Julia advocated for that, and among other people.
You're welcome.
We had discussions over time and considered a lot of different factors. And yeah, thank you, Mark, for logistically helping us move forward with that.
And the last one on this list, just want to say, continue to look for avenues to invest in kind of the special education reserve account, and the Build Back the Circuit Breaker reserve account. So the select board, within their override vote, the $9.5 million, built within that $1 million for a special education reserve account. We think that reserve account is something Katie brought up as a best practice into the district, and that's something that's vitally important. And really looking to kind of continue to build that, invest that in the future, given what it helps to do related to allowing the town to adjust for unexpected special education expenses. New student moving into the district with particular high needs, new kids aging up and reaching 3 that have need for one-to-ones or early intervention supports or out-of-district placements. All these things are things the towns are obligated to provide, and we should be providing for those kids. But those are sometimes difficult to have insight into over the course of the year, given they don't just start at the beginning of the fiscal year. They can pop up at any point. And so, thinking of ways in which we are making sure the town as a whole has systems that build in sustainability and predictability, similar to what the town already does with ice and snow removal. We're not sure if it's going to be a bad winter, let's have this extra line item, let's have this kind of reserve account within the town side. Special education reserve account can be kind of seen similar to that. It is a reserve account that would be overseen by both the select board and the school committee, so it would require votes of both boards in order to pull from it. So we're appreciative of the select board for their support in the establishment of that, to just build on best practices within special education funding and predictability. And then the last two are kind of joint practices with the town, with the select board, the town administrator, that was talked about a little bit last night at the select board. First one is this procurement of a kind of consultant to provide an assessment of both the town and the school side, finance, budgeting, and human resource practices, and to kind of receive recommendations on process improvements, right? What are the places in which the town is doing well? What are the places where it's not, where we need to invest more, where we can find efficiencies, where we can change systems that will provide us the insights and monitoring and reporting that we need and that we want in order to be good stewards of the financial resources of the town. So, you know, we are extremely appreciative of all the work Katie has done to kind of bring a lot of outside vantage point and best practices into the school department within this year. We're really excited what this potential procurement can do in coordination with the town to kind of look at our department, but also holistically. There's just so many places where the town and the school's finances merge and have to communicate together. And so having that kind of joint collaborative process with the town is something we are excited on. So appreciate the town administrator. I want to shout out John Cohane too for his work in kind of thinking about this and creating conversations around this. So thanks to him. And then the last one is this planned establishment of a joint finance committee. We've been advocating kind of throughout the year of trying to reestablish the coordination between the select board and the school committee with the dissolvement of the select board's finance committee. We just haven't had those lines of communication in the ways we've wanted to. The idea coming from the town administrator, which I think is even better than that idea, is to not only bring the select board and school committee together, but bring the members of the warrant committee within that, so the three primary boards responsible for the town's finances come together to meet monthly, review year-to-date budget reports, discuss trends across town and school departments, and help create plans for kind of better long-term financial planning, which is something that's been discussed here. Jay has brought that up as well, so excited about the possibilities that this brings. And so the last thing is just the FY25, the request that the school committee made last night to select board related to addressing the still projected deficit at the end of this fiscal year within the school committee budget or school department budget. We requested $1 million of free cash allocation, the free cash that was allocated towards the special ed reserve account, primarily because the vast majority of our overspend this year is within the special education department. But take that, and the request was that the select board push that into their town's operating reserve account, which has oversight by this board, not to allocate to the schools, but just keep it in the town in a place where it could be accessed later in FY25. Select board voted to move forward. They only moved over $700,000, not the full $1 million. That still requires town meeting approval, as I'm sure you all know. But we're appreciative of them at least moving over the $700,000. That would cover our current projected deficit. We recommended the full $1 million just to provide the town as much flexibility as possible in addressing the gap in the situation which we are not able to fully implement or see the financial realizations of all the things we are projecting to quite the level we are.
Which includes the state
Which
circuit
includes
breaker.
the state circuit breaker funding, which is still something that we are waiting to get clarity on from the state, and that's something that is within the town's control, as well as if additional special education expenditures pop up, as there are a couple that are coming up. So that was the reason why we advocated for the $1 million. Select board did the $700,000. So if at some point, you know, the goal is to keep that number well below $700,000, if not much below it. However, if it's above that, we'd need to go back to select board and have that conversation and ask for the additional $300,000 to be moved into the account. These are just quickly, without reading them, kind of the reasons why we suggested the reserve account. We want to make sure it's available in FY25, right? And we want to make sure it's kept under the town's control, not allocated to the school department yet, because we don't know how much we'll need, and we don't want to penny more than is necessary to close as hopefully small a gap as possible. And also want to make sure we have oversight and transparency within that process and have another board that we would need to come to talk about, present, answer questions, so the town as a whole has insight into that, and it's not just something that we can pass. Our understanding, and we shared this last night, and the town administrator confirmed it, it does not change the free cash allocated to the FY26 override plan that the town is leveraging to sustain the override through FY30. So there was $3 million of free cash, $1 million was to this account, the other two were elsewhere. We're not touching that, we're touching the special ed reserve account, so that does not affect the sustainability of the budget moving forward or allocations to other town operating budgets allocations. And also want to be clear that the schools are not requesting for any additional funding beyond the $5.7 million allocation that the select board voted on for FY26. So something we want to be clear on. All right. The override budget. Is this me?
Yeah, you just went through my section.
Did I go through your section?
Yep,
Why didn't you
that's
poke me?
It's okay.
I can't see the presenter
Handing it
notes.
over to, I'm handing it over to you, Mark.
You just keep going, you're on a roll.
I really don't want to. All right, I'm sorry. I'm sick of hearing my own voice.
Amanda's had a question. Amanda's had his hand up. I don't know if you want to go through.
FY26 override budget. So our original request for FY26, as y'all know, and especially the school subcommittee knows, was $6.4 million. That was to provide the level service funding for level service for the school department, which includes addressing the kind of structural deficits as we talked about them. The select board moved forward with an override that allocates to the schools $5.7 million, so not the full amount. So there is a $700,000 reduction to the school level service funding that we needed to work through. That is why we unfortunately had to cancel our last meeting where we were going to come to you previously, because at that point our budget wasn't correct. So because of that cut, there will be a slight cut to programming at the schools to accommodate that decrease. That's just a necessary outcome of needing to cut the school's level service budget. Should emphasize, we're the only town department seeing that cut to level service. Obviously, our increase as a whole is much larger than all the other town departments. So, but we are the one, we do need to cut services, whereas other town departments do not. So just wanted to make that clear for folks. Within the overall school budget, we are also looking for ways to reallocate certain resources to address what we are considering to be our most critical investments that we need to make and cannot wait for just additional or new funds to come in to cover. So we are looking for, there are going to be cuts beyond just $700,000 within our budget in order that we can take some additional funding and move it elsewhere. The two primary areas is the funding for the new ELA curriculum, as we talked about before, and funding for increased staffing for English language learner support. The ELL support is actually a mandated service. We have to increase that in order to kind of meet minutes and meet the needs of those students. So those are the two ways in which we're reallocating. And this is kind of an overview of the reductions. So we are cutting a couple elementary and one secondary teacher role. Those cuts will be based upon kind of normal staff attrition, some retirements. So we are not needing to pink slip terminate anybody. They're just staff members who will leave, and then we will move things around and won't have as many teachers. Two less in elementary, one in secondary. We are needing to cut a school bus. Again, that's part of the kind of cuts to service. There's some cuts, and this is one. That was a bus that was added last year in the middle of the year in order to address the wait list. We have significant demand within our needs-based budget. We were looking to add additional buses to kind of fully address all demand of school bus needs across the town. But in this scenario, we're cutting one of those buses. General expense line item cut. Family liaison position is currently open, and we are looking to cut that next year. Program design, there's a NEC program that services some of our students in Collicott and Pierce who are in substantially separate settings. And so there are design changes within that program that is going to allow us to kind of sunset a long-term partnership with Northeastern Center for Children, New England Center for Children, and realize some financial savings to more efficiently run that program. Nurse administrative assistant, we are going to need to increase some athletic fees in order to gain some financial resources back in the district, so that will be borne by families and students participating in those, and increase our circuit breaker utilization. So those are the ways in which we reduce the budget by just under $1 million. And then we are adding back into it just under $300,000 with the ELA curriculum and the ELL staff, as was mentioned. So that is where the $700,000 gets to. It's slightly above 700,000, it's like 714. Great. And now the non-override budget, which is not me.
So our non-override budget, which we developed over a number of weeks. Thank you. Currently represents 66 position cuts. You can see by this list that it's significant. It touches administrators, classroom teachers, instructional assistants, custodians. So it has an impact on all parts of our organization. This represents roughly $5.4 million in cuts to the school budget. The consequences of having to reduce this many positions will require significant work on the part of the school district to look at every system we have in place and do, over the summer, work on expansive restructuring of how we provide services. There was no way with this many cuts, the thing that guided our work was cuts that didn't impact students directly first. But when you have to cut this much out of a budget, there is no kind of additional staffing that doesn't have some kind of impact. And oftentimes people think, well, a staffing position that works directly with students or doesn't work directly with students has less value. And I think while the employees that are working directly with students, those are incredibly important positions. All the positions within this budget sustain the work that we do with students. So they're all, I see them honestly as equally important and equally valuable. We are the select board last night talked about the impacts of the $700,000 if an override does not pass. So we are going to be continuing to look at this non-override budget and may need to return with further reductions, which we are currently kind of investigating.
Last piece, just to name, as I think you know, but more for the public, is the non-override budget in and of itself is not a sustainable budget, right? It has the implementation of all the town's free cash in order to mitigate the impacts of the non-override, in order to soften the cuts across all town departments, including schools. And so, unless that free cash comes in at the same rate plus the inflationary increase, there are going to be more cuts beyond this in FY27. There'll be no way to sustain level services that year. And so we just want to make sure that that's very clear for folks. There's some who believe that the override just kind of resets us on level footing at a much lower rate, and that's not the case. It's going to be a rocky position for multiple years in a non-override scenario. We have a lot of other information we're happy to share and go into, but we'll pause there for the presentation and look forward to questions and conversation.
Liz has first. So we get Liz, then Ron.
Maybe I'm on.
Okay, Aman. Thank you, Liz. Aman, you can go first.
Thank you.
Judy, fourth.
Thank you. I had a question because I know you guys were talking about, accounts and student performance, and I kind of wanted to know if you guys, when it comes to the funding, working around, like, say, a voucher, when it comes to, like, pedagogy, like student tools, because I know today with, the amount of screen time kids are using, their probably attention spans are probably now being shortened. And I was kind of curious, like, the way you guys are approaching this, especially when it comes to funding.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you
So are you talking about within our current budget, what kinds of investments do we have that reduce reliance on digital media?
Well, I'm looking at like when it comes to how we're approaching like student performance, because I understand, like for example, the like student SATs, like, sometimes they might have like those Saturday classes. Another thing I was thinking about was just like the like AI tools out there that I've discovered that, kids can use that actually they're doing in colleges for, being able to study more effectively, if not efficiently.
I mean, within our override budget, we have significant investment in technology, and not just on the hardware and software side, but our technology team, who are, I think, if you look at districts throughout the Commonwealth, are on the cutting edge of a lot of the work happening in AI. We had a conference, kind of like a forum that some of you may have attended recently. We are working, that team, which includes tech integrationists, director of technology and tech innovation and integration. That entire team is working to provide information to teachers so that and working directly with teachers and coaching to support them in helping students kind of better understand kind of the world we live in 2025 and beyond. So I think, if I understand your question correctly, the budget does include investment in helping students with digital literacy and being able to use the tools of today.
No, I think you understood my question. I guess that's why I was like wanted to touch upon. It was like, pedagogy, the tools, because I've just like, at least from my experience, I've kind of found different tools that could, be used like for the classroom. So that's why it helps, especially like say, there's live recordings around lectures. Because as I again mentioned that, there is an issue now with like kids' attention spans versus, attention spans the past 10, 20, 30 years.
I mean, if you're talking about adaptive technology, assistive technologies, like for some students who may be on IEPs and 504s that, right, they have access to some of these different tools. Is that what you're speaking to?
Yeah, but I was just also just going on the average, because I mean, I've kind of seen some of the data that I've seen, like stats, like showing, I think for every 30 minutes of screen time, kids are on their phones. They said there was like more risk around like dyslexia. So that's why I was just looking at just the amount of screen time, especially after COVID, since more kids have, the amount of screen time has basically increased in the past couple of years. Not just IEP that I'm like looking to touch upon. Yeah.
So I mean, in classrooms, students do have access to technology as a special class. They have access to technology, Chromebooks. They're using certain platforms on a daily basis to access content that is able to then be like tailored to their learning level.
Okay.
Right? So, I mean, just whether it's French, ELA, math, iReady, like these are some of the programs that our students are engaging with kind of day in and day out. And we also are doing diagnostic assessments and formative assessments using these platforms, while also, I think to your point, not over-relying on screen time in the context of our classrooms where, the bulk of the teaching and learning is not occurring through these digital tools so much as making sure it's happening interactively with students in small groups, in different settings within the classroom. So I think there may be more sort of wrapped up in your question. I'm not sure if we've been able to speak to it. I think you're definitely raising some key and important considerations that go well beyond the walls of the schools as well, right? Into how families kind of choose to support their kids outside of school. So I'm sorry, if there's something else that you are trying to get at that we haven't answered yet, let us know.
No, I was gonna say, I think you answered it for the most part. I guess it was just also like, I mean, I'm glad to know that there is investments made. I guess I was only curious, knowing around like, spending allocated towards, specific like that, and knowing that you guys have like spent money on tools, trying to tailor to kids, especially personalizing, like that's very heartening to hear.
I can speak to the budget aspect too. So we have a number of paid applications, some of them of which we brought into the system kind of as a result of COVID, and COVID really did change in a way the way that we were teaching because of our reliance on technology during that time. But since then, because some of the applications were originally brought in and they were free at the time, and then they now do have a fee associated with them, we do take the time to go through each one of the applications, identify what the cost of the application is, look at the usage of the application both by our students and by our staff members, and then identify what the cost is associated with that application, and if there's efficiencies within the budget, either by reducing from having an overall district license to reducing it to be a per user license. And so we don't want to obviously pay for something that people aren't using. And so that's a process that we go through and that we will continue to go through almost on a quarterly basis because some of those applications have different start times. So we can't just do it once a year during the budget process. We have to make sure that we're doing it on an ongoing basis. And we do have a director of technology, AJ Melanson, who's done a wonderful job digging into those details. We actually have a meeting on Friday, so I have some of the numbers right in front of me that he did such a nice job, so I can speak very easily to them if there's questions, but that's definitely a part of the process, at least specific to budget development and budget administration.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Bill Salaman?
Yeah. Oh, I do want to say though, you definitely seem in good hands. I had Mr. Melanson years ago in high school for business. So especially if you guys are kind of going over technology and business, he seems like your guy.
Yes.
Thank you, Oman. Liz, question?
So I have 4 questions. So you talked about how in the past we've had to use like kind of free cash or one-time funding for fiscal year. Really my first and second question are kind of interrelated. So you also talked about having budgets based on prior year budgets. Now we're comparing the budget to the actual spend from the year before and then sort of going through as we go along and adjusting for anything that's different. Are we anticipating, other than the $700,000 that's supposed to cover the current deficit for this year, are we anticipating using any one-time funds for fiscal year 2026, like for next year's?
So we have a number of different revenue offsets that we'll utilize that are kind of those outside, if it's state funding, if it's
The
grants.
Medicare, right.
I wouldn't say, but we have those very well defined in the budget. I would say the reference to the one-time funding, when we talk about that, is in excess of what we've already appropriated in the budget. And so right now, I don't foresee us utilizing any. I think another source of outside funding could be if we potentially qualify for a new grant or if there is a new revenue source that we identify. But we just need to make sure, of course, that if we are spending funds through a newly identified grant, that we're really smart about using it for the one-time purchases and not the reoccurring purchases. So I don't know if that helps answer your question. I wasn't very specific.
No, it
Those
did,
were
because
broad, but
It did, because maybe my question wasn't clear enough, but so we're not trying to use like, previously I've heard criticism that we've used like ARPA funds to sort of fill the gap. Well, we don't have that anymore because COVID is still around, but we're accustomed to it. Okay. Well, we don't have those funds anymore. So we're not really having to anticipate relying on
Correct.
sort of some kind of funding to fill the gap in that way, to plug a hole. I mean, if we get a grant, fine, it would be budget relieving, not, but you don't foresee any need in 2026 and the going forward to kind of use one-time monies in order to fill in gaps that aren't budgeted for, I guess is my question.
Correct.
Okay. And then you were mentioning something about this NEC partnership. Are we sunsetting the whole thing, or are you just changing the program? I was very confused about what you're talking about there. I care a lot about that program because it's at Collycott and I have friends whose kids go there.
So we've been partnering with NEC for a long time to sustain that program. Okay.
Oh,
To sustain that program and the middle school program, we had a high school program as well. Typically, NEC comes into a district, provides resource and support, and then districts will take the program on themselves. So that is something that happens in most other districts. We have not done that. We've worked with NEC and continued that partnership and haven't taken the program on. So we are at the point now, and Danielle Wetmore, who is our Director of Student Services, has been working on this for some time to take the expertise we've learned from NEC over these many years and continue to provide the same programming, the same services as we currently are, but having it be our program. So that is kind of what when we talk about the kind of program design, redesign, et cetera, it's actually continuing with the same programming, the same number of classrooms, the same response to the student's IEP. All of those things are remaining the same. We are just taking that program on ourselves, and we are plan to use the NEC ACE curriculum, et cetera. So that is kind of the shift that we're working on right now for next year.
and why would that save us that amount of money that was on the slide?
So Katie has
28,
those
it was
exact
slide 28,
numbers.
but,
It's a
currently
contracted, yeah.
services.
okay, so we'd bring it internal and then, okay.
Using Milton staff.
Okay. And then we were talking about sort of the practice of using the previous year's budget to estimate the next year's budget. And you're correct that we've been kind of talking about that here. And I appreciate you going back and watching so that you could frame the discussion. Seems like from the slides, I mean, it only went back to like 2023, so only 3 years, but at least this problem has been going on since then because we've seen like deficits 23, 24, 24, whatever. Do you know like how long that practice had been going on historically?
I don't know exactly how long. I mean, I think, we aren't trying to spend too much time looking at
Sure.
how long but rather how we move forward, right?
Right.
That is really where our focus is. Like, what do we need to do to support our kids now versus rehashing the past? I
Right.
think, with speaking just from somebody who works in education and throughout, I mean, the sunsetting of ARPA funds, it creates tightness within a budget where you don't have flexibility. School departments across the state do not have
Sure.
flexibility and towns don't have flexibility in the same way that they were having it with the influx of federal funds, and again, across schools and even other town departments. And so the further that we have gotten away from that means the more impactful potentially some of those less than ideal practices, the bigger an issue those have caused and are causing. And so I think that is really my personal takeaway from kind of looking at that is, again, the further we're away from kind of that influx of outside funding that has been able to support us, and as Aaron Bradley has called it, like money trees to help kind of close gaps or address needs. we really got to get back to as best practices as possible in managing and overseeing expenses.
I appreciate this idea of a joint town finance committee. I mean, you're right, we have been talking about having some kind of a way to sort of keep track, and I think that, I know that people have been talking about having like an audit. I know that we have a yearly audit of the entire town, so I don't know, maybe a forensic audit or whatever people are talking about, but I like the idea of having this monthly meeting from members of all these different committees, because that isn't an additional cost, but it still kind of allows us to, it's just my 2 cents, but still allows us to have this sort of transparency and, I don't know to what extent needed, but like oversight, transparency, working together with all these different committees that the town can watch and have access to on Milton Access without any additional cost. So I think that's creative thinking. I appreciate that.
Ron?
Was that all four?
Well, I combined 2 of them, but thank you.
Okay. So first, I'm a firm believer that there's no healthy and sustainable community here without prolonged and meaningful investment in our schools. And I think I've been on this committee for 2 years now, and I know the job that you guys have is super difficult. And especially in these times, I know you guys have had tons of discussions and you're looking into all these ways to save money. And I think I would say that it's appreciated. So when you guys feel like, everyone's hammering you to save money, I would just say a lot of people appreciate your work. So thank you. And, I think it's super important that we're being transparent. And, I know you guys probably have a lot of busy nights just like we do. So I'd like to say that first, and then I have a question. The cost savings for this remainder of the year, I assume if we were to have been able to do that for the full year, we'd save more money, right? Are we planning to do that just for this year, or is that work that will roll over to future years? So you would see that continue, next year and the following year, I just wasn't sure. They seem drastic. I wasn't sure if that's just, we'll just do this now for 3 months to try to find money, but we need to start doing that again come September. I wasn't sure how.
Yeah, you mean the PO freeze, the hiring freeze, the utility, yeah. So those are not sustainable practices. We can't, again, teachers need supplies to support students. They need paper. We need to fill the positions that, we have outlined within our budget in order to support students and support our staff. So those are expenses because the other line items are so out of whack. We have to cut somewhere, and so we're affecting other parts of the budget and parts of student and staff experience that aren't out of budget, but need to reduce those in order to offset elsewhere. So those are not seen as long-term practices. The utilizing of offsets is something that happens on an annual basis. What is happening here that is one-off is the size of the offsets is much greater than we would like them to be. We are tapping those rollover accounts at a level beyond what really they should be responsible for. These are accounts that, again, are funded by people paying into them for the services they have and should be used to cover those. And then the substitute coverage is another one where absolutely not something that we want to sustain long-term in terms of, grouping kids together and not having kind of the small classes being covered. That's just not good educational instructional practice. We just find ourselves in the hole we are in, and unfortunately are looking for every avenue to shrink it as much as possible to have as little impact back on the town as we possibly can.
But with that said, that strategy is being targeted to try to avoid core academic subject areas, just to point that out.
Got it. Thanks.
Thank you. Judy?
Thank you. My question is going to go to the school bus. I saw on your chart of to reduce expenses, you're going to eliminate a school bus. And so my question is, if you eliminate a school bus, and I don't know, I've heard out and about in town, it might be a school bus going to East Milton Square, which has a horrific traffic problem in the mornings for sure. is there more than one school bus that goes to that area or just the one?
So I don't know specifically for this year, but I can speak to kind of the elimination. When we talk about eliminating a school bus, we're not talking about eliminating a specific bus or a specific route. And so we would essentially just be reducing the number of students, but with the ability to service the existing area and service the existing stops. It's just that our capacity may be less than the next year than our capacity is this year. We contract out for our school transportation for our yellow buses that you see driving around town. So we contract that service out. And so because of the procurement laws in Massachusetts, we have to go out to bid for those services. And so as part of that process, we looked at the size of the vehicles to see if there was any efficiencies in moving from a 70-passenger bus to a 77-passenger bus. And so we're hoping that in doing that we're kind of offsetting some of the capacity that we're looking at eliminating through reducing that school bus. So I hope that answered your question. It's not a specific bus. It would just be somewhat of a reduction of the capacity.
Since we're talking about the bus, could you talk about the difference between mandated and
Yes.
transportation?
Yep. So school bus transportation is mandated. So the state has said that we are required to provide transportation to students in grades kindergarten through sixth grade that live over 2 miles from the school that they attend. And so we are required for those students to make sure that we are providing transportation. For our students that live within that 2-mile radius that are grades K through 6, or that for any of our students that are in grades 7 through 12, we're not mandated to provide transportation for them, but we have historically, and we will continue to offer transportation on a fee-based process, depending on the capacity of our vehicles. So families can elect to register their students for transportation, even if they're a high school student, and if there is capacity on the vehicle, then they can pay for bus transportation. And we utilize that revenue that we receive to offset the overall cost that we're paying out to our transportation provider.
The line item, that was a great explanation, thank you. Just to clarify for looking at the chart here, 95,000 is to reduce the bus size on all routes or just?
Just one, so that would just be the elimination of one bus. So
One
we just,
bus?
yes, yes.
So each bus that we have.
And then we have to relook at the routes and reallocate the routes with the remaining buses.
Okay, thank you very much. That clarifies everything for me.
Thank you, Judy. Macy?
So I just want to second what Ron said, and thank you for your service to this town. I know it's a lot of work, just the numbers alone. It's overwhelming for me, but it must be for you. So I have a very simple question about utilities. So I noticed that this year, so far, the expenditure is $2 million. So I'm going to be a little different. I know we're talking about reductions, but your proposed for fiscal year 26 is 1.9. So my question is, to avoid a deficit for next year, should you not be asking for 2.1? It's a lot. That's my second question, because that's a third of your budget going into FY26, which is enormous. But just, I'm just wondering that, because to avoid coming back with a deficit next year, and I'm sure you study this, I'm just looking at it for the first time tonight, perhaps the proposed budget should be 2.1. I mean, with the rising cost of utilities, I mean, everywhere, water, heat, electricity. So that way you don't have a deficit next year, at least in this part, which is a huge part of the budget,
It
the
is.
utilities.
Yeah.
So I'm just asking, I mean, like, I know we're all talking about reductions and trying to save money, which is my second question, but maybe budgeting for more so that you can avoid a deficit next year.
So the utility line for fiscal year '25, one of the slides that we had referenced previously was looking at the water bill at the high school. And so that projected expenditure includes a projection for the water bill at the high school. And this is getting probably way into more details than we need to go into, but here we are. And so the meter potentially has an issue.
Okay.
And so
Wow, okay.
the projection is based off of what was known at the time while we were trying to address the issue that we think is going on. And so a part of the savings that we're very hopeful that will incur is a correction to that water bill, because the water bill at the high school has essentially tripled for this year. And so I think with that correction, it will not only help us in the current fiscal year, but it will help bring that expenditure number in the proposed budget. We should be right in line.
Okay. If there is a mistake with the water meter, will that money come back?
We'll get credited.
Okay,
to us, yeah.
okay.
There will
Okay.
be a correction.
Okay. So my second question is, and I'm sure you've already explored this, is whether the school committee has considered energy efficient sources, because again, this is a third of the budget. So as opposed to cutting a school bus or other necessary things for our children in the schools, perhaps this is an area that can be reduced by some energy efficient options, such as motion censored lights in the classroom, keeping the heat down over the weekends. I know we had I should say, an ordinarily cold winter this year, which was nice to see, given climate change. But I know that raises the heat bill. But I know that a lot of the schools are not being used on the weekends. I know the high school maybe because of athletics on the weekends. But is there something that this is something the school committee has considered to reduce this $2 million bill, which is a lot for utilities?
Yeah, I mean, any dollars that we can not spend on utility costs and can direct them to students or other necessary services for the schools or the town as a whole, we're 100% on board with. This connects back to the partnership with the Consolidated Facilities Department, which oversees the maintenance and improvement of buildings. So the school department has within its budget certain costs associated with maintenance of the schools, but larger capital improvements such as doing some type of energy audit and improvements to the building, reinstalling lights, doing like a large-scale light change to have motion sensors or convert them to LEDs. I think there are LEDs right now, but those types of things would be kind of more on the capital side. Those are things that, we need to talk more about, honestly, within the Facility Advisory Committee. That's the committee that kind of works with Consolidated Facilities and the school department, and we have some outside folks within the community part of that who are great. That community's focus over the past year has been really on this critical space issue and the Cunningham fourth floor project. But that pivoting, I think, again, is valid, is a good question, because it's obviously money that's not. It's supporting the buildings, but it's not going directly to kind of the student's education or the student experience that we would like it to.
Okay, thank you.
Ryan?
Hi, thank you. By the way, first off, thank you for the quality of work and the passion you put into everything. I think people in the town really appreciate the school systems. So, and it was a good presentation. Thank you. And thanks to Katie for fixing or finding a lot of this stuff. I appreciate it. I do have a series of questions, though. I want to ask about the budget first, and then I'll pause a bit. But like, in the last 2 years, the actuals of 24 to 26 went up 12 million. And I've seen the detail, but is there like a summary as to what all that encapsulates? And I might have questions within that, too.
A summary from 24 to 26.
Right, like what, there was a jump, like what was behind all of it? Like, well, like substitute teachers went up, like went from 800 to $1 million, and, which is like 25%. Like that's a question, like why did that jump so much?
I might be able to help a little bit.
Yeah.
I know when looking at the budgets the last couple of years, when ARPA money was coming in and going out, looking at the budget Mr. Milano put together, it wasn't there. Like, it wasn't there as money coming in and it wasn't there as money going out. It was just off the budget, as I recall. Maybe somebody else recalls differently. So I don't want to speak for the people in the school committee, but that might be some of it, is that the ARPA stuff just was not in the budget at all. Is that, Lori, does that sound right or wrong?
Isn't that part of your offset?
So, I mean, part of the jump from FY24 to FY25 was the rolling of remaining ARPA positions under the school budget versus the ARPA funding. So the increase from that perspective in terms of the town budget was that's one of the reasons why the increase looks so high, even though the new positions added were 2 Pierce position, 2 Pierce teachers, and 1 kind of interventionist. So that was a significant portion. I can share my screen real quick.
So you're saying the money that was spent in 24 is lower than it really was because of ARPA?
No, I'm saying the 24, again, some of the budget was in 24 and 23 and 22 hitting not just the town budget, it was hitting the federal funds. So we were spending it, we were receiving those services, but from a town budget, school budget perspective, it wasn't sitting on the town's school budget because it was in this kind of external. So then 24 to 25 was the last year, and this had been happening across the school budget and all the town budgets, positions started to be kind of rolled off of federal spending onto school or other town department spending. The last year was the last one of this. I'm just pulling up our budget presentation from last year. So general fund, ARPA, and ESSER funded positions was the 1.4. So that's the FY24 total. The 6,690 is the FY25 cost to maintain. That's where we get to, and there were some, since February, there were some adjustments, was why this isn't 100% match up with the 67,200. But essentially, the increase of the general fund was the 8.8%, which is the point Jay's making around that jump was significant because it included the movement of this like $1.2 million of ARPA funded positions into the general fund off of this federal funding. The actual increase, and again, this was our request at the time, which we was less than that in terms of like the increase of the general fund, which was, again, the inflationary increases, the request for the additional staff, 3 additional staff positions, those things kind of contributed to the 6.8. Does that make sense?
Well, it does. I guess that's what I'm asking, like,
Yeah.
so if you added 26, it's 73 million, 73.5, like, which would bring the total to 12 million total. And so what's the chunk of that? Like, what is responsible for that? And you had utilities as a piece. I know that went up like 11%. But that's, I guess there's a summary on it. Is there a summary? 26 to 24, there was a jump.
24 to 26.
So I think one of the things that we talked about, that a portion of it for the 26 increase is that right sizing. So in the sense of the budget was X, right? And we were saying like the budget was built on the budget versus the budget on the actuals. And so the increase for for the FY26 budget incorporates the actual spends.
No, I understand that. I'm saying the actual 24 expenses, not budgeted.
Okay.
Actual 24 expenses. There's a jump of 12.
Yes, so I think you're looking at the delta of the 2 years, not just.
Yes.
So what this exhibit shows is this will show you the major categories for the 1 year.
That's it.
So this is starting at fiscal year, the appropriation for fiscal year 25, and then it will show you the percentage for the major categories. So the first line shows just the increases in salaries that's specific to, because our salary increases are due to the majority of our staff are assigned to a collective bargaining agreement. So typically, we know exactly what step in lane that teacher or that staff member will be in for the next year. And so we can assign that cost and project out what the increase will be. And so that's that first major bucket.
And that's locked in. so
And
you can't
that's
do it.
locked in. And then you can also see the salary, the increase that we're saying is the adjustment to the substitute and the class coverage budget. And that's almost $500,000. So you can see that's a large percentage as well. And so this, I think this exhibit shows you the progression by the major category. It's not incorporating the increases from 24. But if we were to go back to 24, a large piece of it would be the salaries, as we had talked about in the previous exhibit with those positions that were previously funded through ARPA now being
Which also
built
includes
in.
headcount increases too.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
So this is just specific for 25. It starts with our budget from this year, and then you'll see the budget impact is the overall dollar figure for that like major category, and that's salaries, substitutes. We broke out the increase because of the special education program needs. We're showing the reduction of the teaching staff through attrition. We're showing that we're eliminating an ARPA offset, so an elimination of an offset has the same impact to the budget as an increase in expense. We're showing an increase in some of the utilization from our revolving accounts, which when we include that utilization from the revolving accounts, we want to make sure that it's going to be sustainable, and that's something that we can carry forward in future budgets. And so that's how 26 was built. And then you can also see special education as a major category and a huge budget driver. But we did build in a reduction in a contracted service, which is the partnership program that we had talked about earlier. You can see transportation increases, facility increases, and then we have a number of miscellaneous adjustments tied to curriculum materials,
Right.
supplies, textbooks, kind of those. We say they're miscellaneous, but those are the important kind of tools that our teachers need that have some inflationary increases from year to year.
So just trying to get to the heart, like student population's been flat for those years, but like if you went special education over 2 years, it's $1 million there. It went up, and then it went actually, I think it was like 1.6 is my quick estimate, over 2 years. Like, why did it have such a big jump? Does anyone know?
Well, one of the, I mean,
I don't know.
No, so one thing, I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, so the state sets the rate. So we have a number of students who are out of district, right? I don't have the number off the top of my head. And so we pay tuition to schools. And the state, I think it was a year or two ago, they set the rate for the state out of district placements like the collaboratives, et cetera, and that increased 14% in 1 year. So, and that came late in the fiscal year. So we'd already set our budget for, you assume the rate for the out of district placement, and that jumped. So say it was $3 million. I'm not going to do quick math, but that increased by 14%. So that was a huge hit 1 year.
So you're required to spend that by the state.
So a student who's sent out of district, the town pays for it. It means that we don't have the services to accommodate that student, and so we have to pay for it. The other piece too is, I think one of the things we've seen is the increase in students. It doesn't mean more students are moving into the district. It means that more students are being referred for special education services. So they have a late diagnosis of dyslexia, or they're in preschool and parents or a teacher assume something is going on, so they get tested. So the minute you're referred, you have to be evaluated. So those are those contracted services. So it doesn't, the population as a whole doesn't have to change, but the population of students requiring services can increase even though we're still at the same number. Does that make sense?
And you can see
thank you.
here, FY '23, '24, '25 are projected '26. Just from '23 to '25 in terms of expenses, right, a $2.5 million increase in special education expenditures, which obviously is an enormous jump. And so that's a lot of what Amanda was talking about there. There's also just some data on special education enrollment within Milton. So the average in the state has increased since SY15. It's increased over the last decade across the state by about 25%. Milton's actually grown at a quicker rate than that, almost 30%, 40%. In that same period, which puts us like in the top 20th percentile in the state, top
Do you have more
80th
kids,
percentile.
special ed?
No, this is
more
this is our
kids in special ed.
well, this is our percentage of identified students, how that has increased. So our percentage of students that we are serving within the district, regardless of whether or not the number's going up, going down, staying flat, the percentage of those kids is increasing.
And I heard that
Over
from
that,
principals.
yeah, over the 10 years, our enrollment has gone up. Over the last 4 years, it's been mostly flat, hasn't really gone up to the point you're making. Although, again, SY20 to SY24, our growth in special education identification, so the amount of students we're serving, went up 30% over that period of time. So that's a huge increase. To Amanda's point, the overall population of the town of kids that are serving is not increasing. The students, the special education population that has mandated these services is increasing significantly. And this year is actually the first time we've seen a slight reduction. It's now 17.3% versus 18.6% last year. So that trend is, what we're seeing within the budget, that $2.5 million increase over 2 years.
You have to serve who you have to serve. You can't control it, but it's odd that it's gone up so much.
I think every district, like he just saying, post-pandemic, I think a lot of people, if you think about, there's a lot of the mental health issues that came out of it, kids being at home in front of screens. And then I think other things that you've seen are, you have parents observing your kids learning. And so maybe things that they hadn't noticed before, they're sitting next to them and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize you couldn't read, or that this writing was such a challenge. So I think you had a lot more parents advocating after that. So you had the mental health piece, but then you had more different eyes on the child. And I think that's one of the things you've just seen across the state, and which definitely made for an increase in kids being asked for evaluations, referred for evaluations. But yeah, it's a lot.
And the other thing, which Mark I think alluded to, is it's not mediated by enrollment necessarily. It's mediated by need. So your enrollment could be flat or going down, but if you're a district where you have a strong reputation in kind of the greater community, and people know, if I move to your town, I will be well taken care of. That is another impact where you could see enrollment going down, but costs going up relative to special ed.
And this is just a comparison chart. These are the DESE, what are called the DESE comparison districts. So DESE assigns kind of a list of districts that are comparable to yours in terms of size, demographics, socioeconomic status, all these types of things. And this is the change in the last 10 years of the special education identification rate kind of across all of them. So all of them have gone up, some of them even greater than us. And you can kind of see where we were in SY15 compared to them, where we are now. So we were slightly below the average. We are slightly above the average now within our comparison districts. But again, all across the state, it is growing. And the ones that grew the most are the ones that were on the lowest end of the special education identification rate 10 years ago. So there's a lot of catching up. So there's some statement that potentially we were under-identifying kids previously, right? But the kids were here, they had the needs, we should have been providing the services, we weren't. That's a possibility. It's really obviously difficult to tell.
I just have one more question on the budget, and this is a harder one, but and then I have other questions too, but I'll wait. But headcount went up, hirings went up in the last 4 years. I think 29. Is that? It seems high, but I don't know. Like, I know special ed obviously contributes to that, but do we know why it went up so much?
So you're talking about the positions added since
Added, right.
2018, or?
No, I think it was 2022.
Okay. The document's from
There's the document is from 2018, and there's 79 positions.
From 2018, 79, okay. It's a better question.
I think the reasons for adding the different positions vary based on the positions. Many of them, which were initially added using those federal pandemic funds, were to respond to unfinished learning that was caused by COVID. Interventionists, something we've talked with Warrant Committee over the past few years about the need for additional interventionists, reading, math, to help our students get extra support and catch up. So that was sort of one bucket of the positions that were added. We were also adding positions to address disproportionality that had been identified, Milton cited. And, you know, that is some of the positions that we have created to address those issues, which are part of special education, but they also, I think, sort of go beyond that as well. So if you kind of are, and then in terms of the specific classroom teachers, we added like half a team at Pierce, for example, to respond to the overcrowding that had kind of crept up through the elementary schools into Pierce. So if you're looking at the list, it really depends which positions you're looking at, what the rationale was. And I suppose, you know, it's organized chronologically here. There would be a different way to organize and explain this by almost like category of need that was being responded to by the positions.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I mean, some of the positions that were added were pedagogical. So we added interventionists. Most districts have had interventionists for a long time. I think we were a little bit late to developing a system of intervention. So you can see a number of positions for intervention. There are a number of positions that focus on social emotional learning and wellness. Again, that's something that districts recognize, this was prior to the pandemic, recognize that students aren't able to learn if they're not able to be well and present and their needs aren't being met. Schools have increasingly taken on health and human services that that students are not getting elsewhere. So a number of positions are added to, again, to support students, not academically, but to help them be prepared to learn. You also see positions on here related to a number of special ed positions, some positions that we've added programming. We've talked about out-of-district tuition a lot. We have added positions to try to do more to educate our students within our schools here as opposed to sending them out. That is a cost savings as well. You don't see that when you see a list of positions added. So I think there are a number of reasons why we've added the positions over time. And I think, you know, need is not decreasing in schools. It's increasing if you talk to any educator. And I think that's reflected in you know, if you went into any one of our schools and asked, like, you know, is this position needed? Everyone in that school would say yes. Here are the, you know, 18,000 different ways that this BCBA supports me in my classroom and supports the students in my classroom.
I mean, overwhelmingly, these positions are special education interventionist-related positions, connected to the point you were making previously in terms of the growth in those costs and the growth in the identification. So that's a significant portion of this, you know. And so I also just want to say for anybody watching, this list of positions that's being referenced is on the school website under the budget documents. It's MPS positions added since 2018. So it is significant. They provide vital needs within our district. All those things. I do want to kind of come back to the framing of, you know, as we think about like the positions added within Milton and our spending in Milton as compared to just the state overall, right, and the increased investment in education as a whole. We, again, kind of our pace lagged significantly kind of early on in the pandemic, and we have those added positions have increased where we are compared to spending across the state. We are still very low, even with the additions of those 70 positions, in the bottom 30th percentile in terms of spending. So even with those positions, while there were added and were added to address student needs, I would not say we are overstaffed within our district by any stretch of the imagination.
I'll just ask one more quick follow-up, but like, on the special education, I had a thought at a previous meeting, I don't know if it's right, but it seemed like every school has special education teachers or staffing. Would there be some efficiency if they were at one school? You know, would there be an efficiency of personnel?
There's some efficiency. The NEC program, we don't have a NEC program, or that, and what will essentially be that same kind of program. We don't have that at every site, so there are certain types of special education programming and resources that are consolidated for that exact purpose, even like the full-day preschool, or I mean the half-day preschool for special education purposes, that's at Cunningham. We don't have that across every single site. So that is done. There are certain levels of special education services that, again, you want kids to stay in their home districts. You want them to stay in their neighborhood, with their friends, to not have to force them to kind of change enrollment and transfer school because of a new identification. That might be just, pull-out service once or twice a week. So there's certain special education services that are best provided at the student's home school, and there's enough students with special education needs that spreading that out across all the schools actually is efficient, and you don't need to consolidate. The state also would look down upon consolidating all of your special education kids in a single school, right? That there would be issues with access and equity within that, because you don't, exclusionary practices of kind of putting all of your special education kids in one school, and that's not good for them. That's not something we would advocate.
Well, at one
But
time,
there are,
weren't they all like, went to a different, not even in Milton?
That's why laws have changed, because kids weren't accessed they weren't educated with their peers, they
So
weren't educated in their community.
Send kids from Glover to Cunningham or something.
Well, you can do that, like, you could set, if a program exists, right, if you, like, different schools have different programs with different specialties. So in that regard, yes, it might be a school where it's more therapeutic, and there's a program that's therapeutic and I'm at Glover, but that program's at Cunningham, or a different school. In that case, you would do it, but if you think about special ed as a spectrum, some kids are just getting pulled out for reading services. Others might just need one thing. So for particular programs, you could go to different schools, because we would house them in different, we would make the programs would be, they would take place in different schools, but as a whole, there's such a broad range of services and needs that that doesn't meet everyone's need, if that makes sense.
there are also times where the staff travel to the kid. So we have physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists who they are shared across the site. So they go to the kids. So the kids don't have to transfer. The staff moves around to service those kids.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Julia, thanks for your patience.
Thank you. First, I wanted to say that was a really great presentation. I know that it's really challenging to message all of this, and I think your that presentation was really sharp, clear, focused, to the point. So very well done on that. Also wanted to thank you for the recordings of the finance subcommittee. I think that's a great change, especially in light of this override we're facing, and I know other people are finding it really helpful to be able to view those. My question is, when we think of a non-overrides world, it is really hard for me to fathom, what that actually looks like and how we're going to survive that as a town. Are there other towns that have, I mean, I know Braintree had, I don't know the details of it, but are there other towns who have faced that situation where a very large override did not pass? And, are you looking at those towns for things that didn't work for them? I really cannot fathom a world where we have to lay off 66 teachers. So I'm just trying to understand if there are other examples out there of where this has happened, and if you're looking at those.
I mean, I am personally not aware of another community that has been through this level of a catastrophe, which is what we're looking at. I don't know if others are. I know that, just in the past few days, we've seen one override fail in Duxbury. Yesterday, it passed in Natick. The reasons why it fails or passes, I think, are certainly worth exploring and understanding. I believe in Duxbury, I think they lost 18 positions from the school. So that's terrible and obviously order of magnitude different from what we're talking about here. So Katie, I don't know, Peter, if you have other examples. I think it is very important that the messaging to the community is crystal clear, just at how high the stakes are for this decision. And we know it impacts beyond the schools as well. But no doubt about it, like the cuts we're facing for the schools, as this slide illustrates, are just, they will, I think, all of us on school committee who have kids going to these schools right now, it's very scary to contemplate, that Milton schools will never be the same for as long as my kids. I have like a second grader and a fifth grader, and I feel like if the override fails, their education will be damaged for the duration of the rest of their time in Milton, because it will take so long for us to build back from this. So I think I appreciate your focusing on it. I think this is just the job we have as a community. I think, there is a campaign which is totally separate from any of the work we are here to do. But it's going to be really important that the whole community understands what is actually at stake when they're making their own personal choices. I don't know what else to add, but it can't be overstated. So I do appreciate taking a pause to think about that together.
I can just speak from my experience too. So before I started in Milton on July 1st, I was the business director for Duxbury Public Schools, so I had left there a few years ago and had a short stop in North Attleboro. And so just in thinking about my experience working in Duxbury and working in that community, there are a number of different similarities between Duxbury and Milton. I think both communities really do value education. But I think there's a number of differences too. And I don't know that you can really compare the two communities when you're talking about the override and kind of talking about the process that we're going through. It's so specific to the community and their kind of the fiscal reality of the town, the approach that they're taking, the budgetary approach. And so even as being someone that had certainly a level of exposure to Duxbury's budget, and then now being in Milton, it's really hard to kind of compare the two, other than if we're just simply talking about the numbers. I think looking at a school district and cutting 20 employees and then looking at position cuts of 66 employees, it's the compounding of the 66 is just, it's just almost overwhelming, right? And so I would argue from my stance that the non-override budget that we're looking at truly would be devastating. And so I just, again, think that that's something that we really have to, not that we want to focus on that devastation, but really truly understand that that is the reality that we could potentially be living in. So that's just from, just from my experience being in Duxbury and now being in Milton.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just hard for me to fathom how the schools can even operate with losing that many bodies. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Steve.
Oh, okay. let's see. Great presentation, Mark, actually. I think you team, I think you framed up the situation very well, and I think as we talked this morning, I think you need to lean in and tell your story, because I think it's a good story. And you need to let folks know the numbers, right? So when I hear special education, I think of what I've learned from listening to you all in your meetings, and 39% increase, 1,200 IEPs. Wow, that's crazy. You've got staff doing neuropsych consults, right? They're supposed to do 13, they got 38, they're overworked. So cutting that team has an impact. Students' social impact with anxiety, peer pressure, everything, screens, it's not gonna stop. And we can't let this critical population in our town get hurt or impacted. So I think it's critical. I also think it's important to plan for more black swan events, right? I mean, these are unforeseen events that are gonna happen. It's inevitable, right? Winters, they're tough. Water bill, budget shortfall, our superintendent resigning. These are big impacts that have long impacts on our town. So planning for that, I think, is important. So I applaud you for doing that. Question I have, well, I guess before I get to that point, I guess the comment I make on the buses is I think, and then 95,000 per bus, that's a lot. I see East Milton, I live there, I love it. We see 2 buses coming through my neighborhood each morning to take the high school and middle school, and I'm sure there's more in the neighborhood, but enforcing the bus passes might help you a little bit because there's no drop-in center for the kids to hang out, right? We don't have a space for them to go, so they go to the square and hang out. So I think that would help out a little bit there too. I guess my question would be too, I think it was on the 7th, is it 19th, we met, or you had your meeting, and you had Mask in there, and they talked about recruiting. And they said they could start that process and hire a new superintendent in 2 weeks by the 31st. Where are we at with that? Because this is critical. I mean, this is our CEO of our schools that we need that person. We're about to launch into a new fiscal year, and we're coming out of one, so what's the future look like?
So yes, the window of applications closes on Monday, the 31st. We do have some applications in. We're going to be processing those, and we're optimistic of being able to make an announcement as soon as possible. That's what we're working towards. Yeah, that's right. For an interim superintendent, we are in, I think you're referencing at the school committee's meeting last Wednesday, we had the executive director and field director from the Massachusetts Association of School Committees who are supporting us with this expedited search. We are a member district. They provide this service to us at no cost. They are helping us to collect applications, screen, provide insight, because we did develop criteria for an interim superintendent that would be an experienced superintendent from Massachusetts that's familiar with many of these nuances that we're facing here now. And we have prioritized that criteria, and so they're helping us to screen those candidates. And we're really hoping to be able to provide that clarity to the community very soon, because we understand the challenge of the sort of sense of instability we're in right now in this moment. So yes, we're definitely working on that.
Thank you. And one last comment too. So the last week we've had the opportunity to sit down with DPW, police chief, fire chief. They have needs as well, right? So just to kind of paint that picture of the town, our police force can't use cams. They have no money to have body cams right now. They've got the money, but they can't afford 90 grand to hire an IT director, right? So all dollars matter, right? We talked about 24,000 in your meeting last week. I think came up. All dollars matter. I think that's important. Look at the fire department. They have 11 people on staff. They need 17. They're a level or a step 3 fire department. That impacts our insurance. These are critical matters that the town is impacted. So this is important for the schools to get this right, because it is a waterfall effect on these other departments that are working within their budgets, and now they're getting squeezed. So if we don't get this right, they're impacted as well, again, right? So keep the hard work up. You guys are doing a great job. and
Yeah,
gals.
I appreciate it. I'll say, I think it's a conversation again for us as a town, and I think it's something that when we went to select board, we've advocated, that we have needs, the town departments have needs. We know, we've shared how efficient we are being. I don't have data on the town. I can't imagine they're not just as efficient. We spend very little in terms of kind of at tax comparison compared to other towns in terms of our residential property tax rate. So I think, as a resident of the town, I really appreciate all the questions y'all brought up, learning about a lot of those needs that otherwise were not discussed anywhere else that I'm aware of within the budget process was helpful. I appreciate you flagging that. I hope you will continue to flag it from that lens, because that's just not our ability to look at other departments, talk to other departments about their needs. It's just not our role as school committee, but I completely hear you as it relates to it's one town, one budget. We are all very aware of that, and we need to make sure we are being thoughtful and advocating for our students and using the funds appropriately, but being mindful of, again, the other needs within the town.
Just one infomercial too. You might want to take a look at Nantucket. Natick's, thank you, Nantucket. It got that on my mind. Look at Natick's their preliminary budget profile. It's very helpful. The summary they have in there, you might be able to get some best practice out of it you can leverage to tell your story. So I think graphics will tell the story easier, and bullets make it consumable for the folks out there, because no one has time. How many times do you see an email TLDR? It's too long, I can't read it. Right? So anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Jay?
Hi, thank you. So when looking at making up the budget for this year, the biggest number that I saw for making up the shortfall this year was utilize offsets. And I don't know what that means. And specifically, one of them caught my eye that said Medicare. People in this room can tell you I like talking about health insurance. What does utilize offsets mean? Specifically Medicare or in general? What is that?
Medicaid is the
Medicaid.
reimbursement program. There may be a reference, apologies, if it's maybe.
It's in slide 17, I'll show it. It's in the history slide.
Okay. So the offsets are any of the outside revenue sources that we receive throughout the year. So a portion of those we built into the budget because we assume that we're going to use them to offset the cost of operating expenses. But sometimes if we receive in more revenue than we originally projected, and in some instances we could receive less, but in the case of receiving in additional revenue, we're using just the additional amount above what we originally defined in the budget to be able to offset expenses.
Okay, that makes some sense. Why are we getting Medicaid money?
It's a reimbursement program through the services that we're providing in the schools. So the schools are required to provide some medical services to students. And so there is a portion that we're being reimbursed.
So it's like.
Can someone else explain?
I can explain. So there's federal mandates for the state to provide early childhood prevention services. It's called EPSDT. And the schools have to implement that, and they are reimbursed from the state, and the state has to do it because there are federal regulations that require it. You don't want me to go into it, but that's the basic gist of it.
Okay, so it's not dependent on individual kids within Milton being on Medicaid?
No, it's a program that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services require the states to implement through our own state regulations. So
Thank you.
But it's early childhood prevention services, but it's through the schools too. So it's not CHIP, which is a whole different story. So, but anyway, I didn't mean to jump in, but
No.
I just happen to have a background.
It's just an expert on that.
So.
What were the other two? That was the one that left out of me. What were the other two?
Circuit breaker and chargebacks, just rollover accounts. So Katie can speak to what circuit breaker and what the rollover accounts.
Sure. Circuit breaker is the reimbursement program that that the state of Massachusetts has for special education expenses. So it's for specific expenses. And what the state does is they set a threshold of we are responsible for a certain amount of the expense, and then any amount above the threshold that the state sets, and they set it on an annual basis, they will reimburse us a portion of that in the next year, in the upcoming year. So this year, in fiscal year 25, we're being reimbursed with circuit breaker funding for expenses that we incurred last year. And so circuit breaker funding, we received that for certain tuition expenses, and there's a threshold that's set for that at the state level. And then we're also reimbursed for transportation expenses. And again, it's a portion of the transportation expense for special education.
So we get the cash in the following year.
Correct.
How does that work accounting-wise?
So it's a reimbursement. So best practice, or what we try to institute, is that you essentially would use or leave a year in the bank for a circuit breaker, and you're using the previous year's funding, and then you, as the revenue is coming in, because it's paid on a quarterly basis, that just goes into the circuit breaker account. You leave it, you account for it, and then you utilize it in the next year to offset your expenses.
Okay, again, that sounds like, I guess what I'm saying is, for accounting purposes, we're in FY '25. Do we book the revenue that we're going to get next year, because we know we're going to get it next year, and it's for the stuff this year?
No. So no, we
Okay.
would book the revenue that we're receiving now. It's just but what we're actually receiving the funding for is based off of a reimbursement of previous year's expenses, because those expenses are known. So we have to go through a claim process where we're submitting that expense information to the state, they're certifying it, and then they're reimbursing it to us.
Okay, I'm surprised, but not a good use of everybody's time to talk about accounting. So, and what was the third one?
Third one was rollover funds. I just want to share this for circuit breaker. This is the history of the circuit breaker reserve account, revenue, expenses over time. So that's also information, Jay, if you're interested in accounting. But the rollover funds are varied. There are a few different accounts that Katie can speak to.
So the chargebacks, it's just a term that we use, again, for the revolving accounts. So we have, the school department has a number of revolving accounts that are specific for whatever we're receiving in the revenue for. If we're, for transportation, we spoke about that earlier, we charge, and that funding goes into a revolving account. And so in some instances, we utilize funding that was received into the revolving account to offset expenses that we're incurring that are in the operating budget. So we may have a program, an example would be community schools, where it is our wraparound programs that they do the before and after school, and a number of summer programming. They receive in revenue, and it's a self-sustaining fund, so the revenue that they receive offsets in its entirety the expenses that they're paying out to their employees. And then we also take a portion, and we essentially are charging them for utilizing our space. And so we may charge them for a portion of utilities or just costs as assigned, and then that helps to offset the overall operating budget expense.
Are there restrictions on what those accounts can be used for?
In some instances, there are. Yep, and so there is a chart that a State Department, I can't think of which one right now,
Okay.
and I can share that too, but it's defined by Mass General Law in some instances, and the state kind of has maybe a multi-page document, but it says what the revolving fund can be, what the Mass General Law is that helps to establish it, and then what the allowable costs are, if you can use it for capital and
Okay.
and different.
So everything we're taking out of these revolving funds is going to things that are proper
That
for
are
that fund.
allowable expenses, and so like for food service, it's because that's federally, a portion of that is federally funded. The reference that we made for this fiscal year. I reached out to the Department of Education just to make sure that the allocation that we'll be moving forward with is something that is, they reviewed and that they're approving at an allowable cost. And so we just want to make sure that everything that we're doing is within Mass General Law and kind of the limitations that are, or kind of the guidelines that are being set forth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ron?
I know it's getting late, so I'll try to make my couple comments quick. I have 3 things I want to mention. I lived for about 7 years next door to one of our former superintendents, Mary Gormley, and I'm certain that the superintendent role is probably one of the hardest, if not the hardest roles in this town. I think you have a lot of stakeholders, and you're almost certainly to be underappreciated. So, Dr. Burrows, I'd like to thank you for your service and wish you the very best on the next adventure for you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So that was the first one. The 2 questions I have, Mark, on one of your slides in the framing section, where you had that chart that shows us in the lower right quadrant, or not even quadrant, but just the lower right corner. You know, I think if I think about the non-override option, it's effectively a 10% decrease in the operating budget, right? I would think that will push us off into some no man's land, no person's land on this chart. And while I think it's great to be an outlier, I think it's good to be an outlier for a good reason. I think if we go, the cost would come down, I assume. I don't know if we're going to pass everybody, but I would think you come further down in that cost row and we will be somewhere, you know, by ourselves effectively. And I think, you know, it could be interesting to look at that, because I think that would show that we're able to deliver great results, but only for a little bit of time. And eventually that'll catch up to us and we will probably lose out on student achievement and student performance dramatically. So I think this chart is super helpful for me to kind of see what happens if we think, hey, let's just save $6 million. I'd love to save $6 million. I think everyone would, but what is the cost, right? And I think obviously we don't know what the impact would be, but I would assume it's going to push us into the lower left at some point after a couple of years, because you won't maintain the performance or the deliverables. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Not really a question. The third one is a question. On the fee structures, in one of the scenarios where we were charging for sports activities, and you may have, I assume you already thought about this, but could you talk a little bit more about how we would try and keep that from being a regressive fee for lower income families? Because obviously sports are super important, and especially for kids coming from needy families, I just worry that, you know, even saying $50 for a family maybe that can't afford it, I just worry about that.
That's a good point.
You want to speak to the programs that you'll have in place related to supporting families of need?
So we've had programs in place for a long time to support students who can't afford to pay for any number of fee-based kind of activities within the school system. We do share that information annually with families to let them know here's how you go about if you can't afford to pay for this trip or take part in this club. And many families do avail themselves of that. And that's something that we feel absolutely committed to. And in any kind of budget conversation, I've never heard anyone say, like, that's a place where we could save money. That's not a place where we would ever save money.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
All done. Lori?
Fees, we also pay attention, like athletic fees are capped per family too, so that's important. And as we consider what the particular increases will be for these fees, anytime we're talking about any fees, we're also taking into account our comps with surrounding communities. We want to make sure that we're sort of staying in line, and I think there are some fees. I think athletic fees maybe, I don't want to speak out of turn, we haven't really discussed this in depth yet, but one of the ones where we're a little under. We obviously don't want to, we don't want to be way under the average fee of our area. We also don't want to be way over. So we pay attention to that anytime we're considering increases, whatever transportation, or whatever the program might be.
Thank you.
And one thing I'll just add on fees, because this has come up a lot, I think recently, is a lot of people think if we charge a fee, that fee is paying for the service. And most times that's not true. It helps. It's a portion of the total cost, whether it's a club, an after-school club at the high school, whether it's sports, whether it's, all the different things that we have fees for. But the transportation, those are not cost neutral. So, Katie, like what, for example, with a bus, what is of that 95,000, how much would the fees collect with, let's say, 70 students or something?
So, I know overall for transportation, we typically receive in $300,000 in revenue during the year, in our overall expense just for yellow bus transportation. So for our in-district is over $1 million. So the 300,000 is only covering a portion of it.
Do you know how many students that is?
For how many students we transport?
Yeah.
I believe we transport, I don't have the exact number. I can get you the exact number. But I believe it's 1,900 students, tiers of transportation. So because of our start
So
times.
it's like $150.
It's, I'm sorry, what the fee is?
The fee would be like
$325 for the bus, and there's a family cap. And we just recently talked about instituting a late fee for registration. So the fee schedule is something for all of the fees that we're charging. That's something that we have reviewed a number of times this year. I know it's reviewed on an annual basis here. And so
You'd have to triple it to make the money.
we'd have to triple it to completely cover the costs, yes.
And the athletic fees, it used to be $45, I think, per season. That's, 4 years ago for my daughter. I can't even imagine that would cover the transportation to go play tennis in Natick or Needham or wherever she used to go. So I'm just thinking that even that fee was a bargain for people who are able to afford it.
Well, it's cheaper than Milton soccer or softball. Considerably, actually, right? I think it's like 150 or something like that per season. So.
Sorry, Lori. You were supposed to talk. Jumped in on you.
Oh, no, I have
Thank you
one-
very much. Lori, if you have any questions.
Well, I have so many things.
Lori, then Peter.
Do you want to go? Because I'm all over the place.
And Liz.
All right, well, I'll jump in. So, and thank you all for your efforts on behalf of the students. And also for the taxpayers. And as we're talking about, Mark, and you'd mentioned this in one of your meetings, and I saw it as you're in a bad place from a town perspective in that you have missed 3 budgets. I wouldn't run away from that. I love a good scatter diagram, and that was beautiful. Will this new budget keep us in that same potential spot?
Yeah, it's difficult to say because it just depends on what all the other communities across the state do, and the passage of overrides will jump people up, the failure will drop people down, depending on the sides of the override. So it's really difficult, and again, this is 23, so this is 2 years ago, just because it's a lagging indicator in terms of the state getting the money, the information. This is part of the audit that they do for every school district. They pull all this resources to be able to calculate per pupil spending, and they produce that kind of on a 2 years basis.
So my advice would be not to run away from the budget overrides, I mean the budget overages, but to explain them, do it quickly, let people know what it is so that they will trust that the new budget is something you're going to manage. I trust it because of Katie. I got to tell you, when I first heard that we were budgeting off of budget and not actuals, I thought I was in a parallel universe. I don't understand how that worked. You have, thank you, Katie, for the smile. I appreciate it. It's just not, it's so far away from best practices, I don't even think you can call it a practice. So now that that's in, can you confidently tell the people of Milton that you're going to manage to this budget and that you're going to hit this budget and not be over? Because if you can't, then yes? I see heads here, yes?
Yeah, I mean, what we said is we need to hit the budget. What we request from the town and what we get allocated from the town and budget then accordingly, we need to operate within that. We need to hit that. Even with the unknowns around special education, those are things, I think, to the point made, like, we have to figure out ways in which we make that, as predictable as possible and create mechanisms within our budget that allow for us to receive those impacts and still carry forward and still operate in the way that we promised the town. Essentially, we promised the town we can provide this service for this amount, and we need to carry that forward.
Great, thank you. Lori?
Yeah, Lori.
So I'm going to jump on that. I think Select Board member Bradley had crazy concerns last night about the same exact thing. And I mean, again, thank you for all of your work, all of you. I mean, it's a lot. I've been living it with you for 3 years. And I'm learning a lot, and it's hard to know all the pieces. And I'm trying to get all of my data points, which I'm missing a lot of, that I asked for before. So I still would like to get them. I'd still want to follow through on it all. I think that I have the same concerns of what will happen if next year there is another 15% increase in special ed costs. How will we address it? How will we get there when this whole year has been it's been painful to watch the excruciating meetings that you put yourselves through to try to determine what to do and how to deal with it without cutting staff, when 80% of the budget is staff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, again, I think there's two different things there, Lori. I think there's a deficit within the current year, and then there's year-over-year increases. So I think the thing we can't guarantee, and we've said this to the town, is the impact of special education and the inflationary pressures that puts in terms of keeping the school budget at 2.5% year over year while maintaining the same level of service for all students. If special education is 14%, there is no way we can fit that within a 2.5% increase to the schools without cutting services. Just math doesn't work. And so that on a year-over-year basis is a challenge. It's a challenge for Milton. It's a challenge for every town across the state. And so it is a reality, and that's one of the issues of Prop 2.5 and that compared to kind of the inflationary pressures.
Anybody give a follow-up comment?
Yeah, on that point.
No, I'm sorry.
I think that the problem is, right, you have to provide half-day kindergarten for free. If you want to charge people for the other half, then I think people are not going to go. So my thing would be, I work full-time, okay, so I'm either going to say, I can't be arranging for my children to go from one thing to another thing and then have to figure that out. And I remember when they had half-day kindergarten when I was little, and then my year was the first day that they had full-day kindergarten, and that was a miracle for my family because it was so challenging for my mother to get my brother from the half-day kindergarten to some kind of after-school program. It didn't exist back then. And he's only a few years older than me, but I would think that it would be very, very inequitable effect because people whose parents work full-time because they have to work full-time or they have, whatever career, would not be able to manage that. And so the ones that can afford to pay for their kids would be able to pay for their kids to go full day, and the people that can't would just stay at home. And you would be further, as you said, Mark, further widening the gap between people, the haves and the have-nots. And my concern about that is they learn how to read in kindergarten now. Like, my kids straight up learn how to read in the first half of kindergarten, and then they're like progressing. I mean, when I was in kindergarten, what were we learning? Like, this color is red, this color is green, this color is yellow, this is an eye. We didn't learn how to read. Now they're so advanced. I feel very passionate about that, but whatever. but we still have to provide half day. So you're still having, kids are coming, you still have to have buses for the ones that live further away. I get it, it's half in this time and half in the other time, but you're still having to have those classrooms, the aides, the classrooms with the bathrooms, the busing, the custodians, everything. So I agree with you. I'm not sure how much money it would really, I like people's creative thinking, I have to say, but I'm not sure how much money that one would save in particular.
Can I just say on that one, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go right ahead.
Maybe to Jay's point might be, if the override does fail, it might be worthwhile to know what you'd get for that, if you did that. Because they used to do it here, like what the income would be.
When was it discontinued?
2010, probably, on or about.
Maybe it's sooner, because my daughter.
I thought it was more recent than that.
Maybe it was 2012.
I think before that, because my daughter went to kindergarten in 2008, and then we didn't have to pay.
No, we're talking about free full day.
Yeah, I think
Free
she
full
had
day.
free full day. That's 2008, 2000.
It's
Was it
it's
before that?
more
I
recent
know she
than
did.
2000.
Because I didn't have to worry about.
It's 2014 when my son started kindergarten.
Thank you.
To pay them.
I remember the lady told us that you guys are very lucky.
Okay.
Because it was the first year that we have universal free kindergarten. So yeah, 2014.
Do we get any state funding for it?
I think we do.
Or did that all go away?
We don't get any grant funding, but so if you have a tuition-based kindergarten, the Chapter 70 formula, which is the state funding formula, you only get, I want to say credit, because Chapter 70 is based off of your enrollment. They only base the enrollment on 0.5 of the kindergarten student.
okay.
So it would actually, when you increase to a district-funded full-day kindergarten, you get to claim your full 1.0 student, so it's more money through Chapter 70,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Wow, I've just lost what I was going to say.
Lori, can Steve jump in?
Yes.
All right, thanks. Great conversation, love it. I've got a question. Talking about in the spirit of transparency, Peter, when you first came on, you did a report. I thought it was amazing. It was your strategic vision, outline your goals, your milestones. It was awesome. I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. Why can't we go back to something like that for the school committee to write and have a quarterly report? You're a business, right? You have P&L. Why can't you do that? I mean, if you want transparency, show where you invest your money, then you're not going to have to do this heavy lifting every time you have to ask for more money in your budget. Report out. It's pretty simple. And you talked about earlier, recasting, looking at that. Here's how we performed. Here's the key metrics. Here we are going to adjust our course based on this feedback in real time. I mean, that's how we run business. I mean, that happens every day. I mean, probably you guys agree with that, I hope. But I mean, seems easy and logical. Why not consider it?
So we do quarterly financial reports and produce those. We did a quarter one report, shared that publicly, talked about it in finance committee, talked about it at school committee.
Mm-hmm.
The quarter two report is the whole reason that we have shared about the FY25 to the exact point you're talking about.
Right.
Here is the projection. We want to flag this based upon the projection that we have concerns and make that publicly available versus what occurred in FY24, which is that there was no projection that there was an issue until the end of the year when there was an issue. And that was what we were working diligently this year to avoid. Obviously, we're hoping to avoid that by not having a deficit within the current year, but we wanted to make sure the second we, as a school committee, knew, we made that very publicly available, because we did not appreciate how untransparent, non-transparent it kind of was at the end of FY24. But we do have those quarterly reports. If there are things within the quarterly report that you think like we don't hit on or don't express clearly enough, certainly feedback on the process. We have some limitations within the financial reporting system, which is part of what we're excited about, like consultants, and maybe the consultants will flag something similar. But Katie, I don't know if you have other thoughts on the quarterly report process.
And was your question specific to the quarterly financial report, or you?
Yes.
Because you were
Well, financial.
referencing like implementation, kind of.
I'm looking more at the financials, looking at the performance of the overall. I mean, there's certainly milestones that'll be targeted inside there. I think the performance of those is critical. I don't think everybody knows they exist, right? So if you go in these meetings, you're going to say, well, I told you this. They're like, when? So I think that's important. Again, your story is there, and just telling it, I think, will help. I mean, you guys are doing amazing work. I mean, just put it out there.
No, I think how we improve communication is always something we're trying to think of. And
We could keep the budget landing page. You know, we could retain this feature we've created, budget landing page, where we're collecting relevant documents. And that's an example of where those quarterly reports could live there. People could, review those as they become public. So I think that's something we haven't had the opportunity to discuss yet, but I know that we're interested in learning from, what has worked and what could work better. And we want to be able to sort of identify continued shifts in practice beyond those we've already committed to. So thank you for that.
No, thank you. Thanks for the background.
If I can just add too, specific to the quarterly reports, because I misunderstood your question, but for the quarterly reports, so we do produce those. They're typically shared with the finance subcommittee and then shared with the full school committee. I am part of a Massachusetts School Business Association group. And it's a professional development group, and it truly just connects all of the business directors throughout the Commonwealth. And so one of the things that we've been working on through the association, and with a smaller group, but also at the statewide level, is a best practice document that's specific to financial reporting. So we're currently in the process of collecting samples from other communities and then kind of looking at what other people are doing and what information they're sharing, kind of the mechanism that they're sharing, and then trying to come up with a document to support that. So I think that also ties back to when we talk about best financial practice. That's like a small example, but that is something that is currently a work in process. So just to kind of speak to that through
That's awesome.
some of the work that I've been doing with my Job Alike group as well, kind of like outside of Milton specifically.
Lori?
Oh,
Brian?
no, go, you can go.
I saw your presentation, you're going to do monthly reviews, I think you said, on finances. Is the principal now, I don't know if it said that, but is the principal now going to be responsible for their budget of their school?
So it definitely, we're making it a collective effort, so making sure that, because portions of the budget are very much school-based, and so making sure that the principals know exactly what the budget is, exactly who the people are within the budget, that we can't go over a budget. So that's something that, as when I started in Milton, very much trying to make sure that everyone is aware of it, because it can't just be kind of my position or the business office that's handling it. It has to be a collective effort throughout the district. So I think that's a little bit of a shift in practice, but very much something
But that'll help you.
that we've been working on, and they truly, the principals and the directors, a special education director, technology director, there's a number of staff, they are responsible for making decisions that have significant budget implications. And so when they're not thinking about, or if they don't have insight into what is my budget, then they're not considering it when they're making that decision. And so we're now saying to them, the budget is truly a part of that decision, and it has to be, because we need to kind of live within the means of how we set the budget. So yes, they are all very much
Good.
an important part of the process.
The only things that count are the things that are counted, right?
I just want to clarify the cadence of the meetings. The monthly meetings we were talking about is the planned establishment of the joint finance committee with select board, school committee, and warrant committee. So you might be meeting monthly with us next year. I don't know who would be appointed here, but we appreciate you. The school committee, finance committee meets, I mean, at this point, twice a week, every week. And even in the fall, it was once every other week. So regular meetings. I just want to shout out the rest of the school committee, especially members who aren't even part of the finance committee, just coming. It's an enormous amount of time that they are all spending really diving into this because of the importance.
Volunteer Laurie for that.
I'm resigning.
I have two more questions. One is the audit reports. Like, a lot of the issues you had should have been picked up by the auditors. And so I guess maybe two questions. Are you going to address it with them and maybe talk to maybe a new firm, or have a separate audit being done? But some of these issues that you had should have been picked up.
So the audit that the school department has, we have our end of year financial report audited.
I don't have the new one, by the way, just the.
And so the end of year financial report, they audit it once we've closed our books. And so I don't know that the auditor would necessarily, they're only having visibility into the financial information once the books have already been closed, and then we submit that information to Department of Education at the end of September, and then the auditor comes in.
One of the lines in it is, are you properly budgeting? And they said, yes, they're doing everything correctly.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
We better put them out to bed.
Well, look at it. You should address it anyways.
Okay.
Somebody should. And I have one last question. At the town meeting last year, they asked about somebody, and it was a confusion on it, so we've been waiting a year and a half now to get the answer. But the residency policy, what is it with the town? How is it managed, and is it managed, I guess, because there was a question on that. So that's a big question. Maybe it goes to you, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that. Okay. Yeah, and I talked about this last year, I think, with those of you that were part of the warrant committee. It was, I think, a big topic of conversation last year. And so in my first year, we did review that policy. We did make a few adjustments to that policy. We did a thorough review of every district within our vicinity to see how they conduct their residency. We do have someone who works on this and within registration and, looks at every application. So we have a whole process that we feel confident about. We do respond to issues that come up, whether, if there's a question around residency, we will investigate that as well. I feel like we've done due diligence, and I think where our policy is accurate, it's effective, and and at the same time, I mean, I think I said this last year because I spoke about this at town meeting, didn't I? I feel like I did.
So you follow it. You have somebody that does it, and you have it.
Yeah, we
And
do.
it was revised, but the frequency with which you have to reestablish and verify residency changed, so I think it's on here, but I think now it's every 3 years.
Every 3 years, yeah.
So before, I think it used to be like 1st, 6th, and 9th, or something to that effect. I don't have it right, but now it's every 3 years.
Okay.
You have to do it. It was updated this year.
All right,
Yeah.
good, thank you.
Can I just ask a question to follow on that? Have you had appeals, or have you had to chase, like, what's been the volume that you've had, that there's been an issue identified that you had to get involved with to resolve?
You mean like at my level, or?
Yeah, I thought if there was any appeal, that it went to you, as the superintendent had the,
Or designee.
or designee.
Yes. So we've had appeals this year, and we've worked through those and made determinations once we've talked with the family and looked at the evidence, and
Have there been a lot of appeals or not really?
Not a lot.
That's good.
The rationale of adding the third grade check was to provide our registrar with additional information that would be more recently updated, because that supports her in conducting the investigation that determines what level of additional investigation is needed. And so that was really an important piece of why we decided to add that in, was to support her in keeping more up-to-date records that would then be something that she could check more efficiently than, you know, if it hadn't been updated as recently. Requires more, you know, investigation at that point. And she's following through that more consistently now. That was also a request from the staff, right, to sort of support them in doing the work.
And do we know how many, or do you, because I don't, know how many of, there's a, if you don't have the bill, the tax bill, you're renting, is that what
Yeah,
the
off top of my head,
landlord?
The property owner certification.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that number is. It's a fair number. I mean, it's not like in the tens, it's more than that. And I can get that for you, but I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you. All right, I have another topic you won't like. And you thought it would have been residency. The French program. So it feels like a private school education in a public school. What's your reaction to that? Like, how many schools offer a French program for 12 years in the Commonwealth besides us?
It's over 40 years old.
You mean like the number?
The number of districts that are offering something to this effect.
I mean, there are, I mean, I know there's one in Holliston. There's one kind of up north. There are probably, like, in terms of French programs, they don't all look the same. You know, you can do immersion or semi-immersion. I mean, there are a number of different ways to design a program like this. If we're not just talking French, and we're talking Spanish, or we're talking
Immersion,
Chinese.
I guess immersion is what we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, having worked in other states,
Yeah.
it's not unusual to see public schools with an immersion program of some sort. When I lived in Eugene, Oregon, in the district I lived in, there was a Spanish immersion program that it was in one school, so it's a slightly different model than here. It's actually not, I would say it's not uncommon, and it's something that districts are kind of continuing to look at.
Yeah, there are multiple Spanish immersion programs and Chinese immersion programs up in Boston Public Schools I'm familiar with.
Yeah, Lexington has a Chinese.
Really?
So,
Lexington.
full disclosure, my son's in the French program.
I wasn't suggesting we kick
No.
them out.
No. But what I'm curious is, right, all those kids in his class, there's 27 kids in that class. They'd be in a class. Like, they're not going to not be in the school. They're going to be in a class. So the teacher is teaching them all day in French. She weren't teaching them in French, she'd be teaching them in English. Oh, yeah. Are we saving any money if we were to get rid of the French immersion? I mean, I don't really know. I mean, there's some additional textbooks. You're going to have to teach them one way or the other.
There are some additional costs, but it's not a significant additional investment.
You're still using the
Because
same.
like you said, it's.
Still use
the
iReady
initial
either way.
investment is if you had,
They bought coffee 30,000 years ago.
you know, you mentioned French textbooks, so we have to provide that. We have to provide English textbooks, so
Right.
that could be cost neutral. There are some positions like French reading interventionists. We have fewer French reading interventionists than English interventionists. So really, I would say overall, there's not a significant additional investment to sustain French immersion.
have a question. How many reading interventionists do you have for the French program? Do you know?
We have 2.4, I believe. Is that right?
Is that spread out? Is that at any one specific school, like Collycott, or do they go?
They go. Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're assigned to like 2 schools, or yeah. I mean, that's spread over our schools. Yeah.
Too.
Yeah, I was going to ask you.
Because it used to be that, I mean, I think that was the dilemma, right?
Well,
That you,
If you can't speak,
if you
if you can't
can't
read in,
English, and you're not supposed to be reading in English, don't give me reading services in English, right? So that was the change, that it's like, if we are saying that our children should be reading in French and they're having a difficulty reading in French, then we need to provide the service in French.
yeah. So
I think
my
that was
children,
the past, I think it was like in the past 2 years that changed.
because I remember my kids going through French, and it was kind of proposed in a different way. If they're having difficulty in English, they shouldn't be going to the French program. If they're having difficulty in the French program, there should be a discussion with parents about maybe sliding back into the English. So that was what it used to
I
be.
think now it's like, let's figure out if we can address the problem in the language of instruction.
The second
And
la-
then if there's an issue beyond that, then I think you have a further discussion, but let's start where they're learning and address it the way that they're learning, and then move on.
Okay, thank you.
They all merge together in the 5th grade, right? So it becomes, that's my recollection. And obviously, I have 2 French graduates in the program, so we're obviously very supportive of it. I have a French major now in college, so.
I have a close friend who's
Yeah.
minoring in
It's an excellent
French
program.
at college now. How many students, though? Like, there's a lot. Well, I don't know, because I didn't get that level of detail yet. But,
Get everything, trust me.
but how many?
I'm leaving here tonight and going back to the office.
How many students that start in 1st grade, which I think there's a lot, there's probably 5, 6 classes from like last 2 years ago, the numbers, in the elementary schools. How many students are there when you get to middle school and then high school? Is the number dropping off? Are kids staying through it? Like, all the kids I know in it stayed through 12th grade. But the numbers, I don't know if they.
Immersion program. Yeah. They can take French courses in those?
In middle school, and then there's French available in high school for those that opt to continue.
Okay.
All right, Lizzie, we can't hear you on
So
Zoom.
how many continue? How many?
The majority continue.
They do.
A large portion continue.
Okay.
And a few don't continue. But it's a very high number.
Okay. All right, I'm just trying to be, I'm thinking outside the box.
Liz?
Okay, so I had a question about slide 53 that talked about the increase in out-of-district special education tuition, which was $993,000. What efforts, if any, have we made to try to, are there students who are out of district that we could bring back into their community schools? And if so, what effort are we making to bring them back into our schools so that they could be with their friends, neighbors, and then added bonus, we don't have to pay that tuition to the other school?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that we talk about frequently. It's something that Daniel Wetmore, Director of Student Services, talks about quite a lot. And in conversations with her, she will often say, I'm working with this family and with this student. I think I may be bringing them back to Milton, next month. So it's something that we are working on both on an individual basis in terms of, sometimes, and Danielle's been in her position for 2 years, she's had to learn how students were placed in out-of-district placements, and then understanding what the students' needs are, and then looking at the systems in place in Milton. And as we're making changes, we're creating space for those students to get those services here. One of the things I've mentioned previously is our space constraints are a huge issue in this area because we need to build more programming, which is obviously an initial investment, but it pays for itself very quickly when you can bring a number of students back where you're paying, $200,000 for a student, and you can set up a program, and if there are enough students to sustain that program, it's a huge cost savings and it's a benefit because the students aren't driving an hour each way a day. I mean, students travel pretty far for these out-of-district places. They're not all like in Braintree and Dorchester. I mean, they're far, some of them.
Kingston, she was saying, Plymouth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's something that we are working on, like I said, on an individual basis, and then looking at what programming, one is the space reality, but what programming can we create to bring students back? And of course, if there's a highly specialized need, it doesn't make sense to build a program for one student sometimes. It's just not even cost effective, and we don't have the capacity to do that. But that is something we're talking about, looking at, working on, and it's an intention to bring that number down. I think it's our first focus is on the student, and then the second focus is it's also fiscally responsible.
I had one other thing. So you had mentioned, I forget what slide this was, but about the potential increase for the fee for the community schools. So sort of echoing what Ron was saying before about increased fees to sports programming. I mean, that community schools, it's already kind of hard to get into because I guess it's not like enough staff to be able to do it and whatever, but it's a real lifeline to people who work and, can't necessarily afford to pay a huge amount of money to have, a nanny or whatever. So I think that it's a great program that we have, especially during school vacation week or the half days or any of those times where there isn't school. Yeah, to be able to have that. And I know that you do work with families so that if they can't afford it, that's not going to be a barrier. But I think that's another equitable concern, sort of as you mentioned, the sports. I've felt that way about sports for a long time. And I also see that any increase in the community schools fee would also be something that we have to think about, but can be very difficult for people.
Yeah, and we last year, we spent a lot of time looking at community schools, and we heard the community and the need to expand the program and expand the number of slots. We had a pretty long waiting list, and as you mentioned, it's a huge lifeline, and for some families, it's really hard to figure out how to get all the pieces to fit if you don't have that care. So we did make a number of changes to the program. One of the biggest was looking at our salary schedule and increasing our pretty much every position to be able to hire employees. It was effective, but the roughly $2 million balance we had last year, we have spent down, and now if we don't increase those fees for community schools, the program will not be self-sustaining. We also we've done a full analysis of other school districts and other programs and costs, and we are very low compared to others. So we do feel like we have some room to get up to market standard. And Katie has more kind of specific information.
I do. I'm going to talk about some of the rates, or
I don't know.
I think the key piece with community schools is that it is designed to be a self-sufficient program, and so it operates outside of the operating budget. The goal is not to have that hit the operating budget, which is actually not what's happened. The opposite has happened. The operating budget has hit the community schools, and so the families paying into the community schools have actually been, in some ways, and it's not just current year families, but because of the balance, as Peter said, that has been built up within that program over a number of years, that those fees have been leveraged to support the operating budget of the district in ways that are beyond what they should, right? There's some chargeback, as Katie has said, they use our space, not our space, it's community schools are our kids too. My kids go every single day. But again, it needs to be a self-sustaining budget. And so by reducing the balance within it, we need to increase those fees over time to address the things that Peter's talking about. But we could make those changes more slowly, depending on if we have a balance within the budget, right, within the account, to kind of wean that budget down slowly. The more we have pulled from that budget to address the operating deficit within the schools means that we don't have that cushion, and so we need to increase those fees more rapidly to align with actual costs associated with the programs.
Do you know how many people you hired for that increase? Do you remember?
The total number of new positions?
For community schools? Sorry.
I'm thinking like 20,
I
but
believe it was in the.
Were they full-time positions or part-time?
I mean, most of the positions are part-ish time because they're.
But would they be part-time-ish with health benefits?
I wouldn't assume part-time employees are eligible for health benefits, but
At a certain
20
level, like
hours.
20 hours, and they get benefits, which I think was part of the shared services cost on that the town runs in terms of the health insurance is a line item of a big expense. And I thought that it had to do with,
We were trying to take our lunch aides.
And then they could also work at community schools, so that they could be more, it could be more, and it was an incentive, right, for folks to sign up and actually do the after-school, because we weren't getting enough applicants to just apply for the part-time jobs. So there was some sort of incentive created there. So there were some positions that did go full-time, but not all of them.
A lot of them are high school students, my recollection.
Yes, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
not, yeah, majority of them, especially the aftercare and the summer care, the summer program, for
Yes.
mostly high school kids.
Yep, yep.
Anybody have any more questions from the Warrant Committee?
I do. The per pupil spend, does that include, is that based upon your appropriated budget plus your offset? And is there a factor for insurance or retirement? Does that all get rolled into?
Yes, so the end of year report, we have to report on expenses that were funded through the school committee appropriation. We also report on expenses that were funded through grants, revolving accounts, any of kind of those outside revenue sources. We also report expenses that are cost allocations from other town departments. So there is a portion of, because consolidated facilities also serve, a portion of their work is the school department, so we report out a portion of the expenses for that department. The health insurance is reported on the end of year report. We report out a portion of the liability insurance that the town pays. So there are a number of different costs that we have to include in that report. And then we also report, a portion of it is reporting out the budget as well. So you're reporting out prior year's expenses and current year budget. And so we have to report all of those budget numbers as well.
Okay, thank you.
Julia?
Thank you. I'm just have a question about the two of the three articles that we received today that are going in front of town meeting. So and it's for the operating budget stabilization fund and then the the reserve fund, and that, I know that particular article was submitted by the school committee. So this is probably just showing my ignorance on larger, how budgeting works throughout the town, but why is it necessary for the school committee to have their own reserve fund that's so specific for these costs of special education, out of district tuition or transportation, when the town is creating an operating budget stabilization fund that says it would fund the operating budgets of the town and the public schools. So I'm just kind of wondering what the nuance is there between your article and why it's necessary in light of the select board's article.
Can I ask a subset, Julia? Thanks for bringing that up.
Sure.
If you have discussed it as a committee, could you give us your opinion on each of the articles as it affects your?
As a committee, we voted on the special education reserve accounts. So we
Stabilization fund?
So yeah, the Special Education Stabilization Fund, we voted in favor of it, which is, I believe, why it got to you. I don't want to speak for the select board and the town administrator regarding the operating budget, but I will share my knowledge based upon watching those meetings and talking to them. But I think, and Katie can speak very well to the Special Education Reserve Account because it was under her suggestion related to best practices. But the operating reserve account is additional tax levy that the select board is including within the override request in order to create a funding source above and beyond kind of what we can expect to get with the under Prop 2.5 in order to sustain the budget over a longer period of time. So if we are just resetting the budget to a certain level this year and then we can only increase it by 2.5 next year, then very quickly next year or the year after, if inflation is higher, we're going to be in a situation where we're going to have to make cuts. And so the ways in which I believe the select board is designing the override and the funds available is to utilize available free cash within the current fiscal year to invest in kind of a reserve account that will be leveraged in future fiscal years, and to create this operating reserve account. So the goal of that, again, is for like townwide operations in general, and to sustain those increases over time when those come in at 3.5%, 4%, 4.5%, in order to kind of sustain that through FY30. Special Education Reserve Fund is a specific fund related to planning and preparing for and providing the town, not just the schools, a tool by which to respond to unexpected and significant special education cost increases within a fiscal year that were not budgeted for. So again, in my octuplet scenario here, a family of octuplets with all requiring significant IEP services comes into town. We didn't budget for that. That we have to provide those services. They deserve those services. But the ability to budget for that within and expect that within a fiscal year is not really there. And so the only way to cover that would be to cut other operating expenses within the budget, as we're trying to do this year, or to tap into a kind of reserve fund to say, ooh, this is a unique one-time situation. Again, comparable to snow and ice, it's really bad winter. Okay, let's tap into that. And then the following year, we'll need to incorporate these costs within our operating budget. So it's very much special education specific. And it is a fund that is overseen by both the select board and the school committee. So both groups would need to vote in favor of removing funding from them. So it is not a school-specific account. And again, it is one of those things we've requested to be implemented with the goal of trying to create sustainability and predictability within the budgeting process and improve kind of our practices. Katie.
But why in that scenario that you just described would you not be able to tap into the operating budget stabilization fund?
Potentially you could, but that operating stabilization fund is not specifically intended for special education costs. The special education reserve account is governed by Mass General Law, so it is not just like a Milton policy we're establishing. We are adopting a policy that's established by Mass law. and can only be used for very specific special education costs. The idea being that, again, that is what that is for if that were to come up. Technically they could use free cash. Technically they could cut allocations of other departments if they wanted to cover costs. Like the town can do a lot of different things, most of them, I guess, with town meeting approval. But it's just two different reasons for having those accounts. Better way to explain it?
No, I looked at the operating reserve fund more as a mechanism for funding future fiscal years in the budgeting process, rather than, I think the special education reserve fund is something that you would utilize within the current fiscal year. So I kind of just looked at it as maybe two different things, but that could have just, again, been my interpretation of them. And very much the operating budget stabilization or reserve fund would be managed by the town administrator. And the special education reserve fund, again, would have to go through the school committee and the select board for approval.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it, the current year versus future year, mostly because, and Julia, I'm glad you brought this up, this is a good point, but I think the difference would be the special education reserve, in order to spend that money, you need approval from the school committee and the select board. They meet every 2 weeks. The other reserve fund, you need 2/3 approval from town meeting. That happens twice a year. If you're put in a bind, I don't know what time of year special education costs come up, but that would be a reason.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions in regards to the budgets, 25, 26, or anything else associated?
One slightly different question. With all this fiscal discipline, is there anything that we are not doing that you think is super important for the school district that is just not being budgeted right now? I'd like to know what the opportunity, or what's not making the cut that you would think, what are we giving up on, if anything?
You mean from a needs perspective?
Yeah. Like what would be the biggest need that we're not going to fund?
I mean, we had a number of things on our needs-based budget for FY26 that haven't seen the light of day.
Since we originally presented them to the select board, whenever that was.
So we had some additional teaching positions at the high school. We had a human resources director, which we don't have. We had an EL director that was also going to be an assistant to the director of student services. We had some other kind of. Oh, okay. See how much I remember. We had funding for after school, like kind of extracurricular support services, planning, curriculum development. We had a fair bit of funding for that. We had an additional position in elementary in grade 1 to respond to class size. We pushed off to year 2 teaching and learning coaches, and that was part of a plan to build out our instructional framework and then bring in coaches to support high quality teaching and learning. We're talking about the ELA curriculum that we're putting in our override budget for next year, so that would support that work and all the other work that we have planned for the instructional framework. And then we had some positions in year 2 at Pierce as well. That those are exploratory positions. There's those classes are pretty tight, and there's not a lot of opportunity for students to kind of diverge from their schedules. So that was going to provide more opportunity there.
So teaching and administrator positions, not like revamp the whole accounts payable system or something like that. It's more educational.
Yeah, I
on
would
another
say.
list.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions or comments? Karen? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Burrows,
Thank you.
Dr. Carroll, all the members of the school committee, Katie, Blake, thank you everyone for your time, the presentation, and the energy. Thank you very much.
At this late hour. Sorry you're here so late. It was my fault.
Well, I don't know.
Well, I wanted to get to 11 because that's when you guys like to go to.
Yeah.
With your own meetings.
Report back from Lori, emailed her.
Who needs sleep?
Right?
It's an early night.
Yeah, exactly. We aim to please.
Mark, thank you very much.
Thanks, thank you. I'll see you.
My boss gave it to
So warrant committee, thank you, Doctor. So warrant committee, a lot of information. It's about 11:15. Think it maybe hold off a discussion until next week.
Okay.
Please.
And maybe vote. Okay. So just so you know, I sent an email. Please read the email. Please read the documents. We discussed them a little bit more today. Just some foresight into the budget. The Community Preservation Committee is coming in on Monday.
What?
Yes, they are coming in. They have two specific articles.
What are they about?
The same two they always ask?
No, these are other projects. Peverly Park is in play. There's another appropriation. We need to speak to them. The chair, Mr. Callahan, and the vice will be coming in to speak with us and describe and talk about that. We can have a conversation about the school budget. We can have a conversation about all the articles. I sent you a list of the entire warrant. I expect by Friday I will have a physical printed copy of the warrant with introductory comments. I ask that warrant committee members review this over the weekend and be ready to discuss. We have 1 week from Monday, okay, to get the comments submitted for the town. So those things. As you can also see, that something slipped back on. Light trespass somehow suddenly reappeared when we were told it wasn't going to be. So we're going to have to address that. I will see what I can do. That could be a green sheet. Maybe get someone in to speak to it and what changes have been made, if anything.
Well, and the public hearing is on the 8th.
The public hearing is after, so that would most likely have to be a green sheet. So that's really, that's kind of what I have. I'm going to be including the entire warrant on the upcoming agendas for discussion and vote. Jay.
For the Community Preservation Act, I want to be respectful and I want to give things the time they deserve. But can we set ahead of time a proposed time limit? Just because, I mean, you set expectations. If you say we'll talk to you for 2 hours, they'll fill 2 hours, and so will we. If we say we think it'll be 30 minutes, you know, if it's 35, as if it's 45, that's not the end of the world. But can we set a time limit?
Yes.
Or
Well, yeah, I can have I'll have a discussion. I've been in email communicate with the chair, and we can address it. Because
Can you do the hand gesture for email again? Very good.
Other than Monday, can you tell me which days you think next week for childcare planning reasons? Doesn't have to be hard and
Tuesday,
fast.
Wednesday, Thursday.
I'd say Monday through,
Friday.
no Friday. We'd say Monday through Thursday tomorrow.
Okay.
We have to just get through the discussions.
I don't mind. I
and
just
the
like to
votes.
know.
Every day next week.
Could be
Every
every
day.
day. I don't care.
Monday
I just
through
like to
Thursday.
know. Thank you.
We need to get the warrant to us by Friday so we can look at it.
Good luck.
I want to say, and I'm not trying to stretch this out. Comment writers, schools, next week. I need a comment from you regarding the budget. Of course, you have to see what, in fact, the warrant says about it.
Well, it
but-
seems so simple. I mean,
Yeah. So I know Brian's been working on the planning board articles. He's already gotten me rough drafts of them. We're going to need some additional article writing for the CPC, maybe the light trespass. could be reaching out to you for a little bit of
I'll
help
do the
on
light
those.
trust
Sure,
pass
Liz.
again.
Thank
You
you.
can make me do whichever one you want, but I wrote the other one, so.
That would be fantastic.
I don't mind doing it again.
The CPC, you know, I have some others. I might be reaching out to some people individually unless anyone sitting here right now wants to volunteer to do one.
What else is there?
Seeing no hands raised.
Judy's hand is up.
Judy wants.
Judy.
Thank you. Could you clarify for me? If the public hearing is after town meeting, how does that meet the criteria that there should be a public meeting?
April.
Yeah.
Oh,
Judy, it's
on
about
an
it's about a month before the annual. So if you want to, if the warrant committee needs, we've suggested the public hearing. So I think we would wait till after the public hearing to comment.
Oh, I'm seeing, I misunderstood. My mistake.
Oh, no big deal, Judy.
Thank you.
Fine.
You're not going to take other departments in like I did the library, and you're not bringing anybody in to talk on that, which is fine.
Not at this time.
Am I expected to write comments on that? He did a narrative.
Yeah, we're gonna have a draft comment put together. So for each of you who have gone to the committees, I'm just gonna ask that you send me anything that you need, and I can incorporate that into the main comment. Does that make sense?
There's a boilerplate probably already.
Yeah, there's already gonna be a boilerplate structured.
This amount, blah, blah.
So if there's anything that you have that you would like me to include, I know Ron sent along the other information from the Department of Health.
I sent the link out to last year's warrant too. You can look at that.
Yeah, so
That was helpful.
I'm just going to insert maybe a sentence or two, or whatever you think is the most important bit of information that town meeting needs to know while looking at that article, and any other flair I kind of dress it with, just from watching the meeting. So that's all I have right now. I'm going to be sending you an email over the weekend. So with the copy of the warrant, just take a look at it. If you have any questions, you can call me or text me, then we can set up a time to talk.
So next meeting's Monday.
Next meeting is on Monday.
Lovely.
Okay, and we also have a planning board vote on Monday also. That's also included in the agenda. We're voting on floodplain, site plan, and ADU.
Wonderful.
And they're holding off on the overlay until June.
Yes, and we will address overlay with them in June. That's a big one. They've been working on it for years.
Yeah, I believe.
But we can talk about that.
I believe.
I'd like to make a motion.
Oh,
Lori.
thank goodness,
To
Lori.
adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by everybody. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Warrant Committee. Thank you, Milton.